Hello, how's it going, guys? This is CRP speaking to you live on May 30th, 2021. Holy cow, it's been a whole year since I started these broadcasts, and it's been a hell of a ride and a hell of a lot of fun, and I hope you've been enjoying them too. And so, yeah, here we get going on the weekly webinar number 61. As usual, just to allay my paranoia, can you hit +1 to ensure that you can see me properly? I'd appreciate it. You ought to be seeing me on the left side of your screen, and on the right side, it should say the state of play, which is the title of today's broadcast. Now, great. I can see by the chat that you guys can see me properly. That's terrific. So let me give you a little intro. What I'm going to be discussing in this broadcast is the state of geopolitical affairs, which is extremely important. In America in particular, they tend to ignore the rest of the world and stare at America's navel as opposed to looking around the world, and this is a serious mistake. Especially now that America is teetering. Let's not mince words. The conditions are set for some sort of economic collapse. The dollar is inflating away very merrily, and this could break out into all kinds of misery in the short order. And so, it's time to pay attention to the rest of the world and see what the rest of the world is doing. Now, I'm going to outline a thesis as to what has been happening over the last 6 to 18 months, okay? But as of late especially, some things happened in April which I think are determinant as to where the world is going to be going for the next several years. I do believe that what has happened over the past 2 months, especially in the month of April, will be seen retrospectively by historians as a major turning point in a new alliance between Russia and China. And so, without further ado, let me just dive right into it. Okay. I'll turn out my ugly mug because you guys don't care about seeing me. You know that I'm there. I'm not an AI. Or maybe I'm such an incredibly clever AI that you guys got fooled by the video imagery that I, as the AI, created. Yeah. And so anyway, I'm just fooling around. Let me get started here. Okay. The state of play. Now, the thing that you have to understand about geopolitics nowadays is because of our incredible technological communication, and more importantly than the communications technology, rather, more important than the communications technology is the trade. Global trade is so important because it is global. And that's why, since trade is global, you have to look at the world globally. You have to look at it mechanistically. You have to understand that, factories in Connecticut depend on parts from Taiwan, from China, natural resources from Russia or from Zambia. The whole world is interconnected. And so you have to think globally. And so when we start talking about this stuff, don't look at a Mercator projector of the world. Look at a globe. And everything is connected, and everything is mechanistic. Mechanistic in the sense that when one thing happens in one spot, something else happens somewhere else. Okay? It's all connected, like a series of levers, a series of gears. The world is a clockwork. Understand that, okay? Okay, so the United States is losing its top spot to China, which is driving a lot of U.S. policy. I would argue that a lot of this policy is a bit of a panic because, you see, over the last few years, you could argue it, but roughly around 2017 or so, certainly today, China, in terms of purchasing power parity, surpassed the United States in terms of the largest economy in the world. Now, in terms of nominal GDP, China will pass the United States within the next 5 years or so. So you got to understand, the United States, for the first time since the 19th century, is going to be the second largest economy in the world, not the first. And this is a big deal. This is a big deal. The current, U.S. administration, because of this sea change, is concluding that China is a clear and present danger. And so it's focusing all of its energy on China and abandoning or ignoring or neglecting virtually everything else. You have to understand that this sea change, this trivial issue as to which is the largest economy in the world is driving so much of American policy because it's an ego thing. You gotta understand that. Because, see, we always say that human beings are rational and so forth and so on, but at heart, a lot of times we are irrational and we comport ourselves as such. And great nations often comport themselves irrationally. Just look through history and you will see a lot of times nations did things that were incredibly foolish that had no purpose. A recent example, how the British Empire destroyed itself by going to war with Germany over the paltry issue of Poland. That's, the British Empire, an empire that had lasted 340 years, destroyed itself by going into a needless war. Then that's the truth, like it or not. Okay. You can say that the Nazis were evil, blah, blah. The Nazis, were they evil or not? It depends, and it depends on what year you're talking about. But in 1939, when the United Kingdom went to war with Germany over Poland, the partitioning of Poland, that was stupid. That was ego-driven. It had nothing to do with reality. It had nothing to do with strategic interest. Okay? So you look at America today, and America is freaking out over China foolishly, it seems to me, the American leadership, of course, because China is surpassing the United States. That's it. That's the reason they're freaking out. And it's irrational, because which country has the biggest economy in the long run does not matter. Other things matter much more. The viability of the nation, how energetic its people, how robust its people are. But who's got the biggest economy? Who gives a shit? There are countries that have very small economies that are incredibly robust and tough and resilient and strong. You don't need to have a big economy to be that thing. But okay, so the current administration is concluding that China is the clear and present danger, and so they're turning all of their energy and focus onto China. At this time, the United States, the American political leadership, does not have a clear strategy for dealing with China. They just see it as a competitor that must be, quote unquote, stopped somehow, which is stupid. That's like trying to stop a rising tide. The Chinese tide is rising. It doesn't matter when the quote unquote mistake happened. There was no mistake. It was just inevitable. China historically has always been a major empire. What's been anomalous is the last 2 centuries of China being weak and divided and conquered. That's the anomaly. But you look at Chinese history, it has always been a major empire, always, throughout history. And the fact that over the last couple hundred years, certainly the 19th and most of the 20th century, it was a backwards, poor country, that was unusual in Chinese history. And China is simply reasserting its rightful place as a dominant nation. And its rightful place as a dominant nation is due to the fact that it simply has, 1.4 billion people. Yeah, it's 20% of the world's population. Of course, it's going to be one of the dominant nations on the face of the planet by just virtue of its population size, just as India ought to be so. The United States has, 5%, less than 5% of the global population. The surprise is that the United States has been on top of things for so long, even with such a small percentage of the population. That's the real issue. But okay. So the Americans don't have a clear strategy for dealing with China. They just see it as a competitor that is, quote unquote, dangerous and has to be, quote unquote, stopped somehow. Now, on Wednesday, I'm going to do a video. I've already recorded it, which will talk about the future war with China. So I'm not going to be talking about that because that's sort of like into the future. Right now, I'm interested in what's going on right now and what has happened over the last few months, a couple of months, specifically in April. Because April was a major month in world history. Don't kid yourself. This was a major thing. It doesn't seem like so. I mean, you just look at it now and you're like, April, nothing much happened. It was kind of rainy, but other than that, no big deal, right? Au contraire. See, in April was the culmination of a whole series of anti-Russian offensives. Now, I talked to you before about how there are different kinds of war, different generations of war, right? Well, the United States and the European Union embarked on a, 4th or 5th generation war. At this point, I kind of like forget which generations we're on at this point. But they embarked on an offensive. And, the previous warfare, first generation was hand to hand in front of each other, stabbing each other. Second generation was mechanized warfare. Third generation was insurgencies. And fourth generation is what we have now, where you have propaganda and working on multiple levels. And the EU and the United States embarked on this major offensive against Putin, Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, whom they see for various reasons as some sort of fucking boogeyman. I mean, they're just scared of him, hypnotized by him, hate him, and at the same time need him in a weird way. And I'll get to that in just a moment. But see, they embarked on this offensive across multiple fronts against him. And these multiple moves, which started, some of them a couple of years ago, some of them just last year, some of them just in March and February, well, it all came to a head in April. And Putin won in all of these contests. And this has been a major issue because these clear victories on Putin's part have gone down extremely well with China. See, and this gives this helps you understand, how sometimes winning is not merely you win the contest, but it becomes an exponential. It becomes a force multiplier. See, winning the right battles. Let's go through them one by one. See, altogether, there were 5 fronts that the EU and the United States fought against Putin. There was the Navalny affair, Ukraine, Belarus, and Lukashenko, the dictator of Belarus, Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and the sanctions against Russian officials. Now, see, this is what happened. Let's go piece by piece. Alexei Navalny is a 44-year-old lawyer and blogger, and he's a political agitator. He's never actually held political office, so I can't call him a politician. He's a political agitator, and he's always been, anti-corruption. That's his shtick, okay? One of the things that people in the West hate to admit is that also he's an extreme Russian nationalist. He's like, fuck everybody who's not an ethnic Russian, okay? But they don't play up that part in the West. No, they play up the part that he's anti-corruption and that he's anti-Putin. Because he says that, and he's come up with some very good slogans about how Putin and United Russia, which is his party, are all just old and corrupt, okay? Be that as it may, Navalny has a couple of convictions for fraud himself. One was some timber deal out in Kazakh or some shithole like that in the middle of fucking nowhere that went south. And the other was with the Eastern European branch of Rocher Ferrer, where it was claimed that a company allied to Navalny's family and secretly controlled by Navalny basically cheated Rocher Ferrer Rocher, or however it's called, the cosmetics company, out of the extra money that they paid on duties that he was able to siphon off, money to the tune of roughly $500,000. Okay, a little over that. And so those are the 2 corruption convictions that Navalny has. Now, the European Union and a lot of other people say that, oh, it's all bullshit, it's not real. The European Human Rights Court claims that it's all bullshit. Well, be that as it may, but he does have those 2 convictions. And see, if you're going to smear somebody, you smear them with the shit that you've got, not the shit that you clearly don't have. It is known and it is true that Navalny's family did do business with Rocher Ferrer. And, it's easy to see how Navalny and Navalny's family could have profited by way of dodging the import duties for cosmetics, because Rocher Ferrer had to pay import duties to bring in cosmetics to Russia. And in those duties that were paid, some of it seems to have gotten into Navalny's pocket or his family's pocket. Okay, and so I'm not gonna say as to whether he actually did it or didn't do it, but the conviction is on his record. So, okay. So anyway, this is Mr. Navalny. He's very popular with the young. He's very hip to the internet lingo. He does YouTube videos. He's got like 6 million followers on his YouTube channel. He knows how to play the media, the social media game. Now, John Brennan, the former CIA director, that avowed piece of shit, said that he, in October of 2020, he imagined Joe Biden in the White House and Alexei Navalny in the Kremlin. See, Navalny is the guy that the people in the West, specifically the neocons, the neoconservatives, and also the CIA intelligence type people and the EU. He's the kind of guy that they would like to see replace Putin. He's a globalist. He's in favor of opening Russia so that European and American companies can once again rape Russia's economy like they did in the 90s. He's a globalist. He's a cosmopolitan. He's that kind of a guy. Okay. And he said so. He's very clear about it and what he wants. He speaks their language, and that's why they support him. Now, in August 2020, Navalny was supposedly poisoned and evacuated to Germany for treatment. Now, that I don't believe it. Okay, because it was reported that a nerve agent was used on him, and yet within a week the guy was walking around and was perfectly fine. The kind of nerve agent that they're talking about is the kind of shit that leaves you like dead on the sidewalk. Okay, so I just don't buy this shit. Okay, the same thing happened with that Russian journalist a while back that they claimed that it was some Russian nerve agent that was administered by Russian spy agency, right? But no proof was given; it was simply posited. Okay, and it just didn't seem like it. It just seemed a little off. So anyway, be that as it may, in August 2020, he was evacuated to Germany. In January 2021, Navalny returned to Russia and he was immediately arrested. Now, he must have known, let me rephrase that. He knew that he was going to get arrested on the spot because he had violated the terms of his probation from his 2 previous convictions. And those the probation conditions were that he had to report in Moscow to his parole officer. And of course, when he was in Germany for this so-called treatment, he wasn't reporting to his parole officer. There's also the sense that Navalny deliberately allowed this to happen because there are ways for him to have gone to Germany and not have been in violation of the terms of his parole. And so it could be that he did this on purpose, that he deliberately wanted to be arrested so that he could be declared a prisoner of conscience and, all kinds of media attention on him. Because let's face facts, Navalny is a guy who loves the media attention. He loves the spotlight. He loves his good living and he loves his spotlight. And so it's very possible that he deliberately set it up so that he'd be arrested. And his thinking was that he'd be arrested and that this would spark a popular uprising against Putin. I think a lot of people in the West also expected this. It did not happen. There were some protests here and there. Yes, some of them were fairly large, but not that fucking large, not as large as you would think. And in the end, nothing happened. And Navalny is sitting in jail in Russia, right? And he has discredited himself completely because he went on like a hunger strike and did some other moves that I don't know the ins and outs of it. I mean, I do. I heard them, but they're just fucking complicated and, inside Russian baseball kind of thing, But the bottom line is Navalny is discredited at this point. He is not followed by anybody. And I think also part of the reason is because a lot of his Russian nationalism has been highlighted. And I do believe that was probably the Putin government that highlighted that to make it clear that he's not such a globalist and that he is, he discriminates against non-Russian people. He's an ethnic nationalist. And so I think that Putin and his government might have played that up. And, they won the war against Navalny. Navalny is no longer in play. I mean, the collapse of his support in Russia is pretty much complete. And so it's over for him, okay? And he was the only guy who was sort of like credible as a counterbalance to Putin. Putin and his United Russia Party, they got shit firmly in hand, okay? Now that's the Navalny affair. At the same time that the Navalny affair was happening in Ukraine, come February 26, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, issued a statement of resistance to the Crimean occupation. Basically, this statement, which was unprompted, it just came out of the fucking blue. Basically, Zelensky and the Ukrainian government were saying that they would never give up the fight for Crimea. Because as you know, in 2014, the Russians captured Crimea and the port city of Sevastopol, and essentially declared it Russian territory. It's a little more sophisticated than that, but for purposes of this conversation, we'll leave it as now annexed by Russia. And the Ukrainians on February 26, they declared that they were going to that Crimea would always be Ukrainian, and they were going to fight to take it back. This is essentially a declaration of war. Mm-hmm. Now, at the same time, there are the so-called Minsk agreements signed between Ukraine and the People's Republic of Donetsk and Lugansk, right? These are two in separate entities, by the way, the People's Republic of Donetsk and the People's Republic of Lugansk, which are in southeastern Ukraine, there with the border with Russia. And in these accords that Ukrainian government pledged to negotiate directly with these two pseudo-governments to bring a halt to the fighting between Ukrainian forces, armed forces, and these two ragtag little shit stains, because that's what they basically are. But they are being funded and covertly supported by Russians, by Putin. Yeah, and everybody knows it. Okay. And so the Ukrainians, rather, they're like very pissed off that they've got to deal with these fucking people. They want to take over Donetsk and Lugansk, and so they amassed an army there on the border with these two separatist regions. This was in March, okay? And this buildup by the Ukrainian armed forces signaled that they were going to retake it by force, that they were going to launch probably a spring offensive, spring being, May, June, not later than that, because in July, August, it gets too fucking hot, right? So you want to do a nice spring offensive, clean, quick. That was the goal. But what happened was that in early April, the Russians mobilized about 120,000 troops in 72 hours. This was extremely important because all of a sudden, the Russians, by mobilizing all these troops, they're basically saying to Ukraine, if you cross the border into Donetsk and Lugansk, we're going to take that as a declaration of war, and we're going to invade your fucking country, and we're going to take it over because we're big. We've got a bigger military than yours, and it's tougher and better organized and better equipped. We'll beat you. The fact that they deployed this number of troops in 72 hours got everybody's military sitting up and taking notice, not just Ukraine's military, but also NATO's military. See, if you guys know about military, yeah, moving 120,000 troops, deploying them, and just picking them up and resetting them in some place that's at least 100 kilometers away, that's a major undertaking. A big army, it's hard to mobilize a big army. To do it in 3 days and have them combat ready in 72 hours, that's enough to scare the shit out of anybody, because that means that those 120,000 troops, they're ready. They are combat ready. And that means that the Russians are able to put that number of troops anywhere on their western border. That is everything from Tallinn to the north, all the way to Georgia in the south. And that means troops on the border with Belarus, troops on the border with Ukraine at any point with Ukraine. And do keep in mind, see, there are no natural barriers here. The whole fucking place here in Eastern Europe, they're plains. It's flat plains as far as the eye can see. The only natural border in Ukraine it splits it right down the middle, which is the Dnieper River. And so the Russians, by this show of force, which they claimed was provoked by the March move of Ukrainian troops, they basically put the world on notice and the major militaries on notice that they can defend themselves, and defend themselves hard, really fucking hard. Okay? This was really eye-opening. The Ukrainians, they shit bricks. Because what happened, and NATO shit bricks too, because see, what happened was that, see, the Ukrainian army is a total of 250,000 men. Twice the size of those troops mobilized by the Russians, sure, but see, they're spread out over the whole fucking country. Yeah. And the Russians assembled this force. Well, actually, there were two forces, 60,000 in Crimea and another 60,000 on the eastern border of Ukraine. This basically shows that they can put that many troops, and of course, they could reinforce them very quickly. Okay. Probably in 96 to 120 hours, they'd have double that number of forces. Okay. Combat ready. And so, of course, you're talking all of a sudden that the Russian army can match up the Ukrainian army man for man but the Russians are going to put them in site-specific places, whereas the Ukrainians have them spread out over the whole fucking country. The size of the force that the Ukrainians mobilized, I do believe it was something like 30,000 men. The men that the Russians mobilized could have rolled them over in an afternoon. I mean, quite frankly, if the Russians had crossed the border during April, it would have likely meant the end of Ukraine as a functioning country. Not kidding, okay? And that's the message that they wanted to send, and it got through loud and clear. And what happened was that the Europeans, both the European Union and NATO, they basically told Ukraine that they would not save their bacon if they went to war with Russia. They were not going to get into that fight. And the U.S. said basically the same thing. See, the U.S. via NATO. And whenever I talk about NATO, the United States, is the leader of NATO. So whenever I talk about NATO, think of it as the European-American alliance where the Americans are calling the shots, okay? So anyway, the European Union and NATO, they basically told Ukraine, we're not going to save your ass. You're on your own. And my suspicion, although this has not been confirmed by anybody, but my suspicion is that the February 26th declaration by Ukraine of resistance to the Crimean occupation, that was the Biden administration that put Zelensky up to it. Do keep in mind that the Biden administration has very close ties to Ukraine by way of Hunter Biden and that whole very corrupt situation. But irrespective of how corrupt it is, they do have close ties to Ukrainian people. And so what happened was that my thinking is that the Biden administration put Zelensky up to the February 26th declaration, and Zelensky went through with it, and the Russians essentially called their bluff, and the Russians won. And they called their bluff by just going all in, okay? And by going all in and clearly making it apparent that they could roll over Ukraine and just take the whole fucking country up. That's it for Ukraine, because all of a sudden it realizes that it can't depend on America, it can't depend on Europe, and it has pissed off the one power that has the ability to invade it and take it over. So the Ukrainian position is very, very bad as a result. Well, I'll get to that in just a moment. The other issue that's very important that people in the West are not realizing very well is that this military flexing shored up Putin internally among his own nationalist party, also the military. It showed that he had balls, because he basically gave the order to go to war if necessary. I mean, moving that number of troops in that amount of time and being war ready, that automatically shows that you're a man not to be trifled with. That you're not to be fucked with by any stretch of the imagination. And so this flexing and this basically calling the Ukrainian/European/NATO bluff basically proved to the military, certainly in Russia, and the vast majority of the bureaucracy in Russia, that Putin's the guy. Putin is the guy who can lead them and can win, because this was clearly a Russian victory. The Ukrainians backed the fuck off, and they've been clamoring desperately for, Zelensky has been clamoring desperately for a summit meeting with Putin, and Putin is just blowing him off. He doesn't need a summit meeting with him, because he showed Zelensky, he showed everybody, that if he really wants Ukraine, he can take it. And there's not a fucking thing the West can do about it, and certainly not the Ukrainians, because do keep in mind, the Ukrainians might have a 250,000-man army, but it is very badly led and heavily demoralized. They're mostly conscripts, or the bottom of the barrel, the dregs of Ukrainian society. There's a lot of corruption in Ukraine. I live here. I can tell you. It's very easy to get out of military service. You pay off the right couple of people and done. And not even for a hell of a lot of money. The only people who wind up going into the military are losers and people too poor and stupid to get out of the military draft. See? And so that is not a strong army. Whereas the Russians, their army is well equipped, well led, well motivated. I mean, I have to insist, moving that number of troops in 72 hours, you cannot do that unless you have razors, okay? Because we've sort of like forgotten how difficult it is to move troops. And a lot of times we think of like what American and Russian and Nazi soldiers did in World War II, and how they would move hundreds of thousands of troops from here to there. But that was after years of fighting where all the dregs of all the various military services had been, cast out or killed off, right? I mean, when Patton did his moves in 1944, right, of pulling out and relieving Bastogne, that movement of troops, those were combat hardened men. Whereas here, the Russians, I mean, there hasn't been a major European war, arguably since 1945. I mean, you can say that the Yugoslav thing was a war, but it was more like a policing action than an actual war. Okay, and so that the Russians were able to move this number of combat-ready troops shows the morale, the high morale. Okay. And so, yeah, Putin, this for Putin was a win. Now, Belarus and Lukashenko, let's get into that. Now, Lukashenko is the dictator of Belarus. He's been in power since 1994. And this guy is a good old-fashioned dictator, He's an authoritarian, corrupt dictator who wins by, 85, 90% of the vote every election. That kind of, it doesn't make any bones about it. He doesn't really pretend, I mean, he goes through the motions of doing the democratic shit, but he's a dictator, and he doesn't give a fuck if anybody knows it, right? Now, Belarus is a very key country in Russia's defense scheme because, like I said, the whole of Eastern Europe is essentially a plain. Belarus has always been a bulwark, a buffer state for Russia, okay? Because Belarus has a lot of ethnic Russians, most certainly, but it has a lot of Belarusians, and ethnically there is a difference. And they are separate, okay? So Lukashenko over the decades has been playing this double game, basically playing off the Europeans and the Russians off of one another, okay? Now, this double game has worked for him like a charm. He's gotten money from the Europeans, assistance from the Russians, assistance on infrastructure shit and technology and whatnot, hard cash from the Europeans, And he basically, he's always the belle of the ball. If you ever see a picture of him, he's like an old fucking, he's like an old man, basically. But the Europeans and the Russians have always treated him as the belle of the ball because they both need him. The Europeans see him as one step closer to Moscow, and the Russians see him as, the buffer zone between them and Western Europe. Now, by the way, parenthetically, I have never understood this obsession of the West with Russia. I think it has to do with a combination of factors. On the one hand, see, the days of the Cold War are fondly remembered because it was a time when it was very clear who the enemy was. The Soviets are the enemy, we're the good guys. That moral clarity, people are nostalgic for it. And with the collapse of the Soviet Union, there is no more moral clarity, especially now where a lot of the European Union countries and the European Union itself are acting in frankly totalitarian ways. Don't give me any shit. It's not a democracy. I mean, the European Union has never been a fucking democracy. That fucking thing is basically a dictatorship by bureaucracy. That's what it fucking is. Let's not kid ourselves. There are no democratic mechanisms. Whenever they put anything to a vote, like for instance, the European Constitution, the European Union Constitution, they put it to a vote in the Netherlands and France. And what happened? They lost. And so they came up with the Treaty of Lisbon to essentially pass that constitution without the approval of the people. The European Union is not a democratically elected entity, and it certainly doesn't have any legitimacy as far as I'm concerned. And I think that the European bureaucrats who run it, they essentially know it, okay? Ursula von der Leyen, right? She is an aristocrat who was named there. She was placed there by bureaucrats, not by the people. Nobody voted for her. That woman has never run for anything in her life. Okay, she's always been given positions. She's a rich aristocratic lady. That's what she is, and she's the nominal head of the European Council, the nominal head of Europe, right? But it's all so much bullshit. Anyway, so the Europeans have always had a hard-on for Russia, and I, for the life of me, I don't quite understand why. Okay, and the Americans too. The Americans have had a hard-on for Russia because of nostalgia for the Cold War. There's also an issue that the Jewish people in the United States have an ancient hatred for Russia because, see, after the Nazis, the Russians persecuted the Jews worse than anybody, okay? Pogrom was invented, the word was invented in Russia. for what the Russians were doing to the Jews. Okay, the Jewish people in America who are of Russian descent, they have family history of what the Russians were like, what they did to Jews in Russia, and there's a hatred for them. Like, as simple as that. Okay. There's also, like I said, the nostalgia for the Cold War. Okay. And so all kinds of factors come into play, but I still don't understand that hatred for Russia, because Russia, frankly, the Americans should have made friends with Russia years ago. If it had been up to me back in, I don't know, 95, 98, 2002, that would have been the ideal moment, actually. The United States should have gone to Russia and say, hey, Russia, when you become part of NATO, and we'll have this huge military alliance stretching from the Urals to the Irish Sea, and we'll all be on the same side. And we will have these military maneuvers that are going to be completely pointless because we're all going to be allied and we're never going to go to war with one another. And we'll just expand Europe to cover Russia. And eventually it'll just be one giant continental hug fest. That's what the Americans should have done back in 2002. That they didn't is just foolish. But anyway, spilt milk, too late now. The Russians know that the Europeans and the Americans are the enemy. Okay? They're not stupid. They understand. And so, as I'm telling you what has happened, Lukashenko was playing this double game. And so the European Union, and by way of non-governmental organizations in Belarus, in September, they started these protests, this color revolution shit in Minsk, in Belarus, right? And what happened was that, this shit started gaining more and more momentum, a lot of momentum. But Lukashenko was able to successfully resist it. Okay, he held on to power. He didn't get to the point of shooting people. Okay, he came close, but he didn't shoot anybody, or a few people here and there, and that's very unfortunate. But he didn't go out there and crack down. It was no Tiananmen Square kind of shit, right? He resisted these September protests, which was surprising to the EU. And the EU and the on-the-ground non-governmental organizations, which are in essence agents of neoliberal ideology, they did all that they could in Belarus to kickstart a revolution, another color revolution, that is a apparently popularly inspired and spontaneous revolution that is often is not funded and organized by shadowy non-governmental organizations funded by rich people in the West. People like George Soros, for instance. I mean, George Soros is out there with open democracy. They fund these NGOs to cause revolutions in a lot of these countries. Soros is doing that for reasons of his own. But this exists. And the European Union and a lot of these NGOs, they coordinate what they're doing. And also the European Union, as well as the United States, uses these NGOs because of plausible deniability, because they can say, the European Union government, the American government, has never wanted to overthrow anybody. But what these NGOs do on their own is not of our concern. And of course, the NGOs are doing exactly what the European Union and the United States wants. And they wanted to get rid of Lukashenko and have him replaced by somebody who would be more allied with the West. And it didn't work. They tried real fucking hard, but it didn't work. Lukashenko held on. And then in April, there was an attempted coup by Belarusian military officers. Now, this, to me, has always seemed a little bit weird, okay? We will never know the truth, or we'll know the truth in many, many years from now. But it seemed, what was going on, it seemed that there were some Belarusian military officers, senior officers, who wanted to take over Belarus and get rid of Lukashenko, right? And they organized and they were plotting and they flew out to Russia, apparently lured there by Russian intelligence officers. And once they got to Russia, that's what they were arrested by Russian intelligence officers and presented to Lukashenko as like, look what we found, okay? Now, did these officers, armed forces, military officers, were they arrested? Yes. And they were senior? Yes. Their names are known, and the fact that they were senior is not in dispute. The thing I have, okay, I wonder, is whether this was not instigated or encouraged by Russian intelligence services, that they put the idea into the heads of these generals, and they, the Russian FSB, I forget the name of it, the state intelligence agency, the successor of the KGB, basically. If they got the idea into the heads of these generals, told them to do it, and got them all to fly out to Russia, to meet up, to coordinate, and there they captured them. See, like it was entrapment. Okay, not faked. I put fake there in the outline, but I don't mean faked. Really entrapped. If it was a Russian game, regardless. Okay, they arrested these people. These people indisputably had been plotting to overthrow Lukashenko. And Lukashenko, understandably, freaked the fuck out, and the Russians handed over these officers to the Belarusians. The Belarusians, Lukashenko, God knows where he threw these fuckers, but, tough shit, there's no excuse for attempting to overthrow your leader, except victory, of course. And they failed. See? Failure is always inexcusable. Victory excuses any sin. Remember that, boys and girls. Anyway, the Russians handed over these officers to Lukashenko. Lukashenko threw them in jail, but also interrogated them himself. So he knows that this is for real. And so now he believes that the EU he knows that the EU instigated the attempted color revolution last fall. And he likely believes that this attempted coup was encouraged somehow by the EU. Does he have suspicions that the Russians did it? Maybe, maybe not, but it doesn't matter. Because the EU, in Lukashenko's eyes, and more to the point, the dominating bureaucracy in Belarus, the oligarchs in Belarus, who all owe their positions to Lukashenko by virtue of the fact that Lukashenko has been there 26 fucking years, 27 years this year. He's been there so long that all the rich people, the powerful people, the people with position in Belarus, they owe their position to Lukashenko, who has either put them there or allowed them to get there. Either way, since Lukashenko felt threatened, all of these people feel threatened by the EU, by the United States, by these NGOs. And so what will happen is that there's going to be a purge in the military, sure. But Lukashenko and Minsk, the governing cupola of Belarus sees now the United States and the European Union as enemies. Okay? And I think that the April attempted coup was a key issue. And that it happened at the same fucking time as the Ukrainian thing and the Navalny thing. Well, now here we come to Nord Stream 2, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. Now, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is something that has been being built over the last 5 years. In September, it'll be done. This September, 4 months away. Now, the United States has tried to pressure Germany to pull out of it. Okay, now the Germans, why do they need Nord Stream 2? Well, because see, Nord Stream 2 provides Germany with natural gas, Russian natural gas, and they need it for the German winters. Germany is, of course, a Nordic country, and the winters are awfully harsh. Now, the Germans used to have a nuclear energy capability, but they've been shutting that down because of the fucking Greens, okay? Because of the whole climate change shit, which, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't make any sense, okay? Fucking nuclear energy is clean as a whistle, right? Shitloads cleaner than any other energy, including any renewable energy, okay? I've been in that business. I've told you before in previous webinars how fucking corrupt and dirty renewable energies really are. Solar panel, wind panel, all that shit. They come across as squeaky clean, but in the end, the chemicals and substances needed to fabricate solar panels, for instance, which is an industry I know because I was involved in it and I made a lot of money off of the fucking thing. Well, I can tell you that those fucking minerals and substances and materials are incredibly toxic. And that shit is just not safe at all, okay? Certainly not as safe as nuclear. Nuclear waste, sure, they're a problem, but they're a very manageable problem. But, okay. So the Germans need natural gas. They built Nord Stream 2 to get cheap natural gas because previously the natural gas from Russia would go through pipelines that crossed Ukraine. And Ukraine is very nervous about Nord Stream 2 because the Ukrainians got approximately 18% of the government's budget from the fees charged for the Russian gas to flow through Ukrainian pipelines. But now Nord Stream 2, which goes from Russia in the north in the Baltic Sea, through the Baltic Sea all the way to the north of Germany, right? There's no need to go through Ukraine. It's shorter, therefore cheaper, and they don't have to pay for the for passage through Ukraine. Okay, and so it's a win all around. It's a win for the Russians. It's a win for the Germans. They want it badly, and the U.S. was pressuring Germany to stop because it doesn't want Germany to get closer to Russia on the one hand. And on the other hand, it was thinking, well, if we can pressure Germany to stop buying Russian natural gas, we have a stick over Russia. And also we can sell the Germans our own natural gas because the United States produces natural gas and it ships this natural gas under pressure in these big ships. You look it up. They're quite spectacular. They're these ships that have these enormous, like, hemispheric balls on the top. And that's full of natural gas. It's very interesting, as a matter of fact. But anyway, the problem with that kind of natural gas, American natural gas, it's a lot more expensive because you have to ship it across the ocean in these pressurized tanks, right? It costs more money, much more money than a passive pipeline such as Nord Stream 2. And so the Germans, of course, they don't want to pay more for the fucking natural gas. Of course not. And so, there was this, ebb and flow pulling this way and that of Germany between the U.S. and Russia. Now, the U.S. also sanctioned Russian Nord Stream officials and sanctioned Russian officials. And ultimately, it was just a whole bunch of different things that happened. But in the end, it didn't change anything. Nord Stream 2 is gonna be done. And by the way, there's no way to sabotage it. It's underwater, okay? Well, I suppose that, if a government really wanted to sabotage it, if the Americans really wanted to sabotage it, they could use some submarine to do it. But it's not an easy thing, okay? It's not like the American Alaska pipeline, which I've actually seen, which is incredibly easy to sabotage and blow up. I've never quite understood why so much of it is above ground, but okay. Anyway, the point. Nord Stream 2 is really needed by Russia. They really need this pipeline, okay? And they got it. They got it, and not only did they get it, but all the sanctions against Russian Nord Stream 2 officials, the Biden administration has basically said that they're not going to implement them. So in the end, they got their pipeline, okay? And ultimately, there's the final issue with all these sanctions by the Americans against Russians, various Russian officials, all of them around Putin. And all of these sanctions, in the end, what has happened is that because of all these sanctions, the Russians, number one, no longer fear sanctions. And number two, they've made workarounds against these sanctions. And the third part, which is the most important, is so many of these sanctions were arbitrary. Sometimes they'd be on, sometimes they'd be off. Sometimes Biden would say something nice about Putin, and the next day there were additional sanctions. So what has happened because of the sanctions, the unpredictability of them, is that the Russians have become inured to them. They no longer affect Russia. And the people who are targeted by these sanctions, the Russian officials, the Russian oligarchs and whatnot, they're pissed. It only serves to antagonize them and want them to help Putin more. See? So the sanctions have, rather than weakening Putin, have strengthened him. The fucking morons. Yeah, because, see, the sanctions were imposed arbitrarily and turned on and off like the fucking lights. And that was a fucking mistake. So anyway, all of this happened April, okay? I mean, all this stuff that happened, except for the items that I mentioned specifically that happened in previous months. Yeah, but it all came to a head in April. April was the coolest month insofar as the Western alliance is concerned, the EU and NATO. Because Putin outmaneuvered all of them. And the key move, the linchpin move, was putting those troops in Ukraine or on the border with Ukraine. Putting that number of troops scared the West badly because all of a sudden they were like, holy shit, this isn't going to be like the Ukraine's roll over Donetsk and Lugansk. And we, NATO, we will go into Ukraine following the Ukrainian army and create this alliance in Ukraine. No, the Russians showed that they could not only hold fast and defend Lugansk and Donetsk from the Ukrainian army, they could potentially invade Ukraine and have it cease to be a functioning country. That scared the shit out of the Europeans and the Americans, okay? Because it's one thing to have your European NATO army roll into Ukraine, sort of like friends showing up at a party. And it's quite another when Ukraine gets in a war, starts losing badly, and starts desperately asking for help from NATO and the Americans and the Europeans, and no help comes because they're too scared of the Russians. It shows up the hollowness of NATO. See? That's why it was such a key move. And I cannot emphasize this enough. The speed of the assembly of combat-ready troops. That's what scared the shit out of them most of all, because the Americans know that they can't assemble that many troops that quickly in Europe. Hard as that may be to believe, but they can't. They just do not have the capability to put together that size of an army. So the Russians, in 72 hours, they had 120,000 troops. Within less than a week, they could triple that with reservists and other forces from other areas. And the Russians know that they don't have to worry about their border with China and Mongolia, because those issues long ago got settled, the border disputes with China. So in an emergency in Europe, they could easily pull all their troops out of China, out of the border with China and whatnot, and have them in position in Europe, gobbling up Ukraine and going right up to the border of Ukraine with Poland, i.e. the border of Ukraine with NATO, European Union. And all of a sudden, you know, NATO is realizing that they cannot match the Russian army. That's what happened. See? And that moment was so key. The realization of NATO that if they played their cards poorly, they would have potentially 250,000 to 375,000 troops, Russian troops, on the border between Ukraine and Poland. And remember, the line separating Ukraine from Poland, it's just a fucking line in the dirt. See, there's no natural border between those two countries. Okay? That scared the fuck out of NATO and the Europeans, and that's why they left Ukraine to their own devices. Okay? Okay, so that all happened in April. What's the effects of the failure of this April offensive? Because you got to keep in mind, all these things happening at the same time, it was a single offensive. It was different parts of the same offensive. And the whole point of all these things, Navalny, Belarus, Ukraine, Nord Stream 2, the sanctions of Russian officials and whatnot, and people close to Putin, the whole point was to destabilize Russia and kick Putin out. And what happened? Putin is tighter than ever. The military in Russia loves him because he showed that he has balls and he's willing to go to war. All the bureaucrats in Russia, any one of them who are thinking of opposing Putin are going to think twice, because they know how powerful he actually is. The fact of all these sanctions has incentivized the Russians to find workarounds to the sanctions. So now the sanctions work less than ever before. You know, Putin won, okay? Now, Ukraine, let's go piece by piece. Ukraine is now more isolated than ever by all sides, because the Europeans don't want to support Ukraine for fear of provoking the Russians. The Americans don't want to support Ukraine because they realize that they could get eaten up by the Russians in 5 minutes. And on top of that, you know, Secretary of State Mnuchin and Victoria Nuland visited Ukraine recently, and they gave Zelensky an ultimatum that the only way that they would continue to help Ukraine is if Ukraine basically opened up its economy and allowed European and American companies to take over state-owned companies of Ukraine. Basically, Mnuchin and Nuland told Zelensky that they want him to position the country of Ukraine so that American corporate interests can rape the country, rape it. I mean, like, stick its dick down its throat and stick it up its ass and just gangbang it to death, you know? Basically what the American interest did and European interest did to Russia in the 90s. And Zelensky knows he can't do this because then he will lose the support of the Ukrainian oligarchs. The Ukrainian oligarchs now are in the position whereby they have antagonized the Russians, so the Russians don't want to support them. And at the same time, they have created a situation whereby the only way that the West will continue to support Ukraine, especially now with this budget shortfall that's about to befall them because of Nord Stream 2 and the end of that money from the gas pipeline, is by uh, uh, letting American and European interests take over what belongs to the oligarchs. See? So Ukraine is more isolated than ever. It's isolated on all sides. And my thinking is that long term, it's going to realize that its only escape, its only hope is to make friends with Russia. And that's why Zelensky has been crazy about setting up a summit meeting with Putin, and Putin just blowing him off. I mean, just not even bothering to respond, just blowing him off like a hot girl blowing off the nerd of the class. You know what I mean? And so all of this, what does it tell you? Ukraine is completely isolated, and eventually Russia will say, oh, okay, fine, let's see if we can help you out. But it's going to cost you. And the price that it's going to take is probably Donetsk and Lugansk are going to be folded into Russia eventually. Okay, I'm talking 3 to 7 years from now. Okay, that's what's eventually going to happen. Yeah, that's the game. Okay, because I'll get to Putin's motivation in just a second. Okay, because it's very important. Well, I'll preview the motivation. You got to keep in mind, Putin's motivation is to repatriate the 20 to 30 ethnic Russians who were, for all intents and purposes, exiled from Russia once the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. See, Putin gave a very interesting interview to Oliver Stone. And it was a 4-part interview, very long, several hours, and fascinating, by the way. And in the interview, Putin emphasized how important it was that these 20 to 30 million ethnic Russians who were in countries like Kazakhstan, Ukraine, Belarus, once the Soviet Union collapsed, all these ethnic Russians were left outside of Russia. And he wants to repatriate them. He thinks that bringing them back to Mother Russia is good for them and good for Mother Russia. Now, whatever you think of this as to whether it's a good goal or a bad goal, that's his goal. Now, another person who wanted to repatriate a large segment of quote-unquote exiled compatriots was, of course, Adolf Hitler. That was the whole program of Nazi Germany, to repatriate all the Germans that were spread out around Eastern Europe, because they were. Okay, we've forgotten that because Winston Churchill, the fucking piece of shit, forcibly relocated all the ethnic Germans and pulled them out of, basically kicked them out of Poland and Belarus and the Baltic republics and shipped them all to Germany after the war. Millions died. That's something that's not talked about very much, but it ought to be. But anyway, Hitler's whole program was to get all of these German people under one roof. And he decided that the way to do it was militarily. Putin is a very smart customer. He probably learned the history very, very well. And he wants essentially the same goal as Hitler, to repatriate all his people and have them under one roof. But from Hitler's example, he knows that doing it militarily is stupid. It's dangerous. You play the long game. And that's what he's doing. That's his motivation. Okay? So Ukraine is now isolated. The Lugansk and Donetsk regions are predominantly Russian. I'm talking 70-80% Russian, right? Ethnic Russian. There is a difference between ethnic Ukrainians and ethnic Russians, by the way. Okay, I personally find it impossible to distinguish, but apparently some Russians and Ukrainians can distinguish them. Good on them. But anyway, the point is that, see, he wants to repatriate all those people. Donetsk and Lugansk will eventually slip into the grasp of Russia. Already you have thousands of people moving every month from Ukraine to Russian, ethnic Russians. And I know a few of them, friends of my wife, that have moved there. Okay, move there because of more opportunities, move there because they just want a better life, move there because they feel Russian. Okay, that's Putin's goal. Isolating Ukraine helps him in that goal, because as Ukraine becomes isolated and there is no money to be had from from the European Union, and as the government sinks lower and lower because of the lack of funding, because of the end of the money from the pipelines, things are going to get harder for Ukrainians, and ergo they're going to want to leave. Where are they going to leave? To Ukraine, to Russia, of course. Okay, so that's the situation in Ukraine. Belarus and Lukashenko, on the other hand, more than ever, they're on the side of Russia. And Lukashenko's double game that has irritated Russians for a long fucking time, that's over. Because he no longer trusts the European Union, because he has a credible proof that the Europeans and or the Americans try to inflict a color revolution on him and then a coup. He believes that they're his enemy, and therefore he has no incentive to go to them. He has every incentive to get closer to Russia. Closer to Russia means more Russian advisors, more Russian military presence in Belarus. And that means Lukashenko is going to hold on to power even longer. So he realizes that helping Putin helps himself. And the Minsk oligarchy, they realize the same thing. Helping Putin and the Russians helps them. So they're going to help Putin even more. Now, Germany, with Nord Stream 2, is going to grow ever closer to Russia, detaching itself from its alliance with the US. I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. But see, the Nord Stream 2 issue and the fact that it's finally going to be completed, the Germans are going to become dependent on Russian natural gas in a way that they never have before, because it's going to be so fucking cheap. Because it's going to be so much cheaper to ship it in through Nord Stream 2 than through the Ukrainian pipelines, let alone the American imported natural gas by ships, right? So the Germans, they will naturally grow closer to Russia. And because of this, they will be more and more afraid of pissing off the Russians, because as you grow dependent on somebody, you want to keep in their good graces. Yeah, you don't want to piss them off. You're not going to do anything to piss them off. The Germans will inevitably fall within the orbit of the Russians, detaching themselves from the alliance with the US. And by the way, as the European Union's economic situation deteriorates, and as Russia and its new ally China, which I'll discuss in a moment, become stronger economically, there will be even more incentive for the Germans to detach themselves from the rest of Europe and from its alliance to the United States and get ever closer to Russia, which is precisely what the United States does not want, but which is happening inevitably. Now, Russia, from this situation of the April offensive, has become completely free from pressure, because all the sanctions and all the bullshit, they finally figured out how to get around them, and so it no longer matters. The arbitrary use of these sanctions hurt the Americans and the Europeans more than it hurt Russia. And finally, Russia and China are closer than ever. That's very obvious. How is it obvious? Because China supported Russian positions across the board in every venue, in every issue, every single time. The Chinese and the Russians are buddies. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what respective politicians have said, and Chinese politicians and Russian politicians have said as of late of their current relationship. Okay? The Chinese, when the Belarus thing happened, the Chinese supported Belarus. When Belarus arrested that opposition leader, brought down that plane, the International Aviation Organization, which is going to review that whole situation, do you know who leads it? It's a Chinese guy. I'll bet you $1,000, each of you, that International Aviation Organization committee that analyzes the taking down of that plane to arrest that Belarusian dissident, not Navalny, some other guy, Protoshenko or some shit like that. Well, anyway, that committee, which is led by a Chinese guy, it's going to side with Belarus. Belarus is going to come out smelling clean as a whistle. Yeah. And there isn't a fucking thing that'll be able to be done, because it's led by a Chinese guy. He was duly elected, and that Chinese guy, he reports to Beijing because he's a Chinese guy. He's the Chinese guy in this civil aviation committee shit, right? Of course, he's going to do what his Chinese bosses in Beijing tell him to do. And his Chinese bosses are going to tell him, side with the Belarusians, because the Belarus are friends with our good buddies, the Russians. And that's what they fucking want. And so you're going to fucking do it. And he will do it. Okay? So anyway, yeah, by the way, the items I wanted to mention, China and Russia, they are de facto allies. they have been smart enough not to say so. Okay. They have not signed some big treaty because they signed a treaty way back in 2000 or some shit like that. Of basically, like, assistance and, the usual foggy bullshit, right? But as of late, China supports Russia across the board. You got to keep in mind the Chinese have been pursuing Russia for at least a couple of decades now. See, because China sees Russia for what it is, a country with incredible natural resources and incredible technology. Because the Russians right now, they are the only country that are seriously pursuing nuclear energy and have made incredible leaps in nuclear energy. Because the Russians under Putin are aware that eventually their natural resources, natural gas, oil, and whatnot will end. So they want to be ready with nuclear. They are pushing for fusion. That's what they're looking for. And eventually they're going to get it. Okay. I mean, it's going to take time. It'll take decades probably, but they're going to get it. Because they're at the forefront of that research. It's shit that matters to them. Because the Russians, I'll tell you from experience, when they decide that something's important to them, they really pursue the fuck out of it. They don't fuck around. Okay. And so they have a lot of technology that the Chinese would love to have, nuclear being among them. Okay. And so the Chinese have been diplomatically pursuing Russia and trying to build a stronger relationship. And the Russians were reluctant because they viewed themselves as a European country. And so they naturally viewed themselves as being more allied to Europe than to Asia. But the way that the European Union and the United States has treated Russia over the last couple of decades, constantly promising things and then fucking them over, they just said enough already. And this latest April offensive that failed, this April offensive across multiple theaters, it failed in every one, but it just showed the Russians you can't trust the Westerners. Because the Westerners, the Europeans, and the Americans want to fuck us over. And so let's make friends with the Chinese, and that's what they're doing. Putin, in a virtual summit with Xi, said that China-Russian relationships are at a historic high. And the words he used implied that this could continue to improve. Now, mark the words that he said that they're at a historic high, all-time high. And this, remember, China and the Soviet Union back in the 50s were incredibly tight. But the language he used specifically made it clear that he thought that the current situation between Russia and China was superior to that. Lavrov, the foreign minister, Russian foreign minister, said also in a recent interview, which was put out in English, clearly for consumption in the West by Western intelligence services and diplomatic services. He said, quote, that there was no ceiling to China-Russian cooperation. Now, the Americans have this foolish idea, and they are pushing it in the mainstream press, saying that Russia and China are eventually going to fall out. This is wishful thinking. It's not going to happen. Because, see, Russia and China realize that they can really help each other. The Chinese have known this for several years. The Russians are finally giving up the ghost in improving their relationship with the West, and they are turning to the East and saying, you know something, maybe that's our future. Maybe the Chinese, with the biggest, boomingest economy in the world, maybe that's our future. And we should quit trying to be best buddies with the Europeans. See? See, it's like the beta orbiter who was always chasing the belle of the ball, the Russians always chasing Europe, not realizing that the really hot girl always had a thing for him. And that's what the Russians are realizing, that they have been chasing the wrong girl all these years. That's what's going on. Simple as that. And they're all of a sudden looking at China with different eyes, realizing it has a huge fucking economy with all these fucking consumers, which will gobble up Russian products. The Russians, sure, they are approximately 1/10 the size of China in terms of population. But they have all these natural resources, all this land. Eventually, they can deliver to China all kinds of natural resources, and China will deliver a huge market for not only their natural resources, but their finished goods and services. The Chinese view Russian goods and services as of high quality, okay? And so, because you might be thinking of like the Soviet Union where everything was shabby and pathetic, right? But that's not the Russia of today. That's the Russia of 35, 40 years ago. Today, Russia produces cutting edge technology, hypersonic weapons, nuclear, as I said before, all kinds of nifty doodads, computer IT technology. Many people do consider the Russian IT as sophisticated, in some cases more sophisticated than Western IT. So you got to keep in mind, the Russians have a lot to bring to the table. And the Europeans, they were the hot girl who blew off the nerd. And the even hotter girl has always had a thing for the nerd. And now the nerd is realizing it and discovering, hey, you know, that European chick, she's just not worth it. This Chinese chick, she's hot as blazes and she wants to fuck my brains out. It's not like she's doing me a fucking favor. I'm doing her the favor. You see, that's the mentality that's going on. You hear some American or European mainstream propaganda say shit that, oh, the Russia-China relationship won't end, won't last, you know, it'll end soon, that there is always going to be mistrust and blah, blah, blah. They're not reading what's going on the ground. They're not reading what's going on when Lavrov talks to his Chinese counterpart, whose name I can't fucking pronounce, or what Putin is saying when he talks to Xi. They are fucking buddies. And this April offensive solidified that, okay? Now, the Americans are pulling away from everything to focus on China for the reasons I explained below. They see it as the enemy, but they don't know how to do it. How are they pulling out? Well, they're pulling out of Afghanistan, finally, because there's nothing to be won in Afghanistan, and it's been 20 years of misery for nothing. Just a complete and utter waste of time and money and effort. There's something I heard there that... well, it's a long story and I'm not going to get into it. I'll skip it for another time. But anyway, they're pulling out of Afghanistan. They are decreasing their footprint in Iraq. They are winding down in Syria. Because again, the Assad regime, oh, that's something else I forgot to cover here. But nothing really happened insofar as Syria and the Russians are concerned. But the Assad regime and Russia are buddies. Because the Assad regime knows that it owes its continued existence to Russia, to Putin. This is important because you see, remember, in the United States, when a politician loses an election, he goes home. But in the Middle East, when a leader loses power, he gets shot and his whole family gets massacred. So, you know, Assad, when the civil war started, he knew it was to the death. He knew that his family, his wife, his children, whom of course he loves like any man would, that if he didn't win, they would be killed. And so he knows that the people who helped him survive this civil war, which is winding down, because essentially ISIS has been defeated, and all the proxy players that the West fielded against Assad have been defeated. Well, they were defeated because of Russian assistance, military assistance. And Assad knows this. Do you think that he's ever going to forget that? It's not that Putin will remind him relentlessly. He never will. He never will have to. Because it will be the same kind of gratitude that you would give to somebody who saved your family from certain doom. Because that's what fucking happened. And it's not just Assad. You got to remember, all of these leaders, Putin, Lukashenko, Assad, Zelensky on the other side and whatnot, they have a whole pyramid below them of people, okay? And you can call them flunkies or followers or whatever the fuck you want to call them. Bureaucrats or fellow oligarchs or whatever the fuck. But all those people bet their future on that particular leader. So when that particular leader is successful and survives, and not only survives, but thrives, they survive too, they thrive too, and they thank their leader for it. Okay? And they will make sure to be loyal to that leader because that leader literally saved their lives. If Assad had lost the civil war, it's not just Assad's family that would have been killed. All of his followers' families would have been killed, like they did in Libya. In Libya, they butchered everyone who had been allied to Muammar Gaddafi. I mean, you only saw how they shoved the gun up Gaddafi's ass, literally, and shot him and killed him. I mean, that was fucking horrifying, right? They did the same fucking thing to all of the people who supported him, unless they were lucky enough to be able to get out of the fucking country in one piece. See? Yeah, these wars, man, these conflicts, they're to the death. Don't forget this. So anyway, the Americans are winding down in Syria. they're loosening sanctions on Iran because the sanctions haven't done any fucking thing. Okay, and that's the thing that's very obvious. And so they are loosening sanctions on Iran because, like I said before, all these sanctions, these constant sanctions, have created the incentives for a lot of these people to figure out a workaround. And the Iranians have been doing the workaround, which is Bitcoin of all things. Well, it's one of the workarounds, right? And the other thing, of course, is Russia and China, because Iran is being helped by Russia. Iran is going to get huge influx of investment, infrastructure investment from China. Iranians are sliding inevitably into the Russia-China orbit, away from the West, because the West isolated them. And an isolated body will inevitably gravitate to some other emerging power. And that emerging power is Russia-China. Okay? Now, the final way that America is pulling away from everything to focus on China is that the Americans are not paying attention to things that aren't related to China. They just don't give a shit. Okay? Anything that is not China at this time in America, in Washington, is not being paid attention to. And that's the most important thing. See, when a country essentially decides that nothing matters except the one thing, okay? Well, it's like that old saying, when the cat's away, the mouse can play. See? So all these other countries, they realize this. They realize that the Americans are just pulling out. And so they start to go in their own direction to what's most beneficial to them. And they start to realize that they can't depend on the Americans anymore. Now, one of the most important and noticeable events is the Saudi Arabians. They are negotiating with Iran over the Yemeni war. If you don't know, Saudi Arabia has been involved in a war with Yemen for fucking ages. 5 years, 6 years at this point, something like that. It was just a stupid war. It's pointless. It's kind of religious, but basically ego-driven. Mohammed bin Salman, who's the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, he's the son of the king and the likely successor to the king, who's a decrepit old man. Well, MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, pursued this war, and it's gone disastrously. It's been a humanitarian crisis for the Yemeni, which is awful enough, but the Saudis have failed to win the fucking thing, right? Even with all kinds of help from the Americans, American weapons and whatnot, mostly American weapons. And so they failed to win this fucking war, and it's been a drain on them. And because of that, MBS is not able to do other things that he wants to do. And it's just becoming a fucking embarrassment, not to mention a huge drain of resources and men and military material. So Saudi Arabia has been quietly negotiating with the Iranians because the Iranians were the ones financing and helping the Houthis in Yemen. And because of this, because of Iranian help, the Saudis and the Iranians have always hated each other because of religious differences, which are important. But it's not so much the religious differences as the natural issue that both of them are big players. They are big producers of oil. They both want to be considered like first among equals in the Arab world, in the Middle Eastern world. It's inevitable that the two biggest bulls, the two biggest dogs in the neighborhood, that kind of situation, right? And Iran, by essentially getting a stalemate in the Yemeni war, won the Yemeni war. The fact that the Saudis are quietly negotiating with the Iranians, I think they're out in Vienna. Vienna is always a nice place to negotiate, nice and calm and quiet. They're out there negotiating to wind down this war. But why would the Saudi Arabians be doing this? Well, because they don't think that they can really count on the Americans anymore. See, that's the thing. They don't think that the Americans can put the pressure on Iran that could help them in the war with Yemen. See how mechanistic this is? When the Americans aren't putting pressure on Iran, because either the Americans don't feel like putting pressure on Iran, or because Iran has figured out a way to get out from under this pressure, well, then that affects the situation going on in Saudi Arabia's back door with Yemen. See? And so that's why they're negotiating. The fact that the Saudis are negotiating with Iran shows that the Saudis don't believe that the Americans are tough enough to help them. Same thing goes with the Israeli attack on Gaza, okay? And they're ignoring pleas from Washington to wind that shit down. What's going on in Israel is a little more complicated because it has to do with internal politics. Benjamin Netanyahu needs to shore up his position because he basically has a serious corruption scandal brewing, right? Or not brewing, it's broken. And the thing is, see, once he steps down from the prime minister's office, he's going to get fucking arrested for like all kinds of graft and shit. I mean, I read the particulars of it, and I don't quite recall them. It doesn't really matter. It's just a penny ante money bullshit. Okay, the typical shit that politicians get mixed up in. And anyway, he's in a lot of trouble. Okay, he'd likely go to jail. The only reason he's not going to jail is because of the immunity of his office. And so, part of the reason that this shit going on in Gaza is happening is because Netanyahu engineered and created the conditions for Hamas to start shooting rockets at the Israelis, and the Israelis start to fight back. A nice little war to divert attention and shore up your political position, right? The Israelis wouldn't have done this if the Americans were really a presence. But they're not a presence anymore. And the Israelis know this. Netanyahu knows this, okay? And Netanyahu knows that he's never going to have a good relationship with Biden, but more to the point, Biden is never going to have his back. And therefore, Netanyahu is on his own. So if he's on his own, and he might get arrested the second he leaves his prime minister's residence, he better not fucking leave the prime minister's residence. You know what I'm saying? And so, yeah, he's going whole hog on this, this thing with Gaza and all that shit to shore up his political position. Now, Germany, like I said before, is in this push-pull situation between Russia and America. Not Russia and Europe, Russia and America. Germany is Germany. And it is currently in the EU, and it will remain in the EU so long as it's to its benefit. Okay? Because Germany is like that. Germany is very pragmatic, and they don't have any loyalty because they just follow what's logical. Because they're fucking Spock of Europe. You know what I mean? So anyway, the Germans are realizing that they need closer relations with Russia because of gas and trade. Okay? Germany and Russia are each other's natural trading partners. They're the two biggest economies in Europe, for crying out loud. Not only that, the Russians are supplying the gas. And so the Germans realize that they will grow more and more dependent on the Russians. And so they realize that it's smart to be building better relationships with the Russians long term so that the Russians will not casually put their foot on the gas pipeline and to hurt Germany. See, because the Germans are thinking, if all we have between Germany and Russia is the gas, right? Then the Russians will cut our gas imports whenever we do anything that they don't like. That would put us in a weak position. So what we have to do is we have to sell the Russians more goods, more German goods, more BMWs and Mercedes, send them more computers, more drugs, more everything, right? Drugs, legal drugs, you know what I mean? Remember Bayer? It's German. And so the Germans are thinking, we got to get them hooked on German goods and services, like we got the rest of Europe hooked on German goods and services. That way, the Russians don't have us over a barrel. They can cut off our gas supply, but we can cut off all this other export shit that we got to get them addicted to. See? That's what Germany is thinking. That's the German strategy. That's what they've done. It's a mercantilistic strategy within the apparent unity of the European Union. Okay? And so the Germans are thinking that they want to sell more shit to Russia. And what they're probably going to be thinking is that the smart thing would be to lend Russia the money with which to buy German goods and services. Why not? That strategy worked like a charm in the European Union. The Portuguese, the Spanish, the Italians, the Greeks, all these fucking people, even the fucking French. We lent them money, we bought their fucking bonds, and therefore lent them money, and with that money, they turned around and bought German goods, and it worked for us, and it grew our economy like a fucking charm. And now these fucking cocksuckers won't pay us back our money, but, all's fair, okay? And so that's what the Germans are thinking, that they're going to play that game with Russia. Now, it's perfectly legitimate to think that this will work. It's perfectly reasonable to think that this will work. Because the Russians, like anybody, if you offer them to lend them money, cheap money, and with that, they can buy your goods and services, they'll take you up on the offer. Fuck yeah. And Audis are very good cars. BMW motorcycles, hell, I own one. And it's a fantastic one. I actually own two. The other one is being built right now for me, Very, very good machinery, very good technology, very good workmanship. And you'll lend me money to buy your very good stuff? Fuck yeah. Where do I sign? And so that's the German strategy with the Russians. Now, what does that mean? That as Germany lends more money to the Russians, and the Russians in turn sell them a lot of gas, i.e., get more money back, and becomes a closer economic relationship between the two. Well, then the Germans very quickly are going to have to make up their minds whether they're America's allies or Russia's allies. Now, that day hasn't arrived yet, but it's going to arrive. Now, you got to keep in mind something else. The likely winner of the next election, which is happening this year, is the Green Party. And the Green Party has historical close ties with Russia. I mean, quite frankly, historically close ties with the KGB and now FSB. Okay? The Green Party, make no mistake, they're a bunch of communists, and they were set up by the fucking Russians, by the fucking Soviets. Okay? They are fifth columnists. Make no mistake about it. Okay? The Green Party, they're all communist friendly. Okay? And that's the truth of the matter. And you want to say that it's not, that it's all historical ties and shit like that. Bullshit. Okay, they're Russian agents, Soviet agents. Okay, they're fucking communists. The Greens, they're fucking commies. Okay, don't pretend otherwise. Anyway, but they do have close ties with Russia, so they don't view Russia as the enemy. They are also anti-nuclear, the Green Party, and which is just absurd. But okay, so they're anti-nuclear, which is going to be very, very good for the Russian natural gas now, won't it? Of course. See? I mean, the Russians' energy policy is transparently obvious. They aim to build more and more nuclear power while they export natural gas and get everybody hooked on their natural gas while they themselves become independent of natural gas. That's their strategy, their energy strategy, long term. It's a very smart strategy. Yeah. You know, like the dealer who never smokes his own stash. That's how you got to be. That's what the Russians are doing. They view natural gas as heroin, and they sure as shit don't want to be hooked on their own heroin. Yeah. So that's what they're doing. So anyway, Germany is, the Germans are noticing the American loss of interest, and for reasons of their own, incentives of their own, they realize that Russia is their future. Now, the EU and France in particular, because of what the Americans are doing, the American pullout, they are realizing that they need to come up with their own separate army. The French actually have an army, and don't be fooled, okay? Just because they lost a couple of wars, well, they actually lost 3 wars, 1879, 1918, and 1940, excuse me. The French, they have a fairly decent military, okay? And, but they want a European army, separate from NATO, okay? Because they sense that the Americans are pulling away. The Americans are pulling away, they're becoming disinterested in Europe, and they're focusing more and more on China. And again, I just can't help but laugh at the fact that they have no clue what to do with China. They just want to go after it. It's a danger, but they don't know what to do, and they don't understand that the winning move is not to play. Like the computer said in war games, like Falkenberg or whatever the name of the computer was. The winning move is not to play, but the Americans don't get it. Anyway, who is losing? America, because it has no strategy, because of the power vacuum at the top. Because, like I said before, in the State of the Union video that I made, the Americans do not have a strategy. They don't know what the fuck they're doing. And it's because there are all these factions at the top. There are these factions that are fighting it out for power. And that's why the Biden administration made these weird contradictory moves insofar as Russia is concerned earlier this winter and spring. That they wanted a meeting with Putin, a summit with Putin, and then the next day they imposed sanctions on some of Putin's people. What the fuck was that all about? And the Russians realize this. They realize that there's a power vacuum. And they realize that because of this power vacuum, they can get away with more. They can succeed more. They can achieve their objectives more easily. Okay? So the Americans, they're losing because of no strategy, because of the power vacuum at the top. Europe is losing because of weak and petty leadership, and also the fact that the European Union is pretty much broke. The only people who are doing well are the Dutch and the Germans. The Dutch, because they are naturally thrifty people who know how to manage money. And they're the only fucking country that has a a balanced budget and a surplus. And so the whole COVID thing didn't affect Netherlands at all. Okay. And the Germans, because the German people are willing to be these dray horses that will be exploited by their social betters, because that's the situation in Germany. Okay. The Germans, man, I mean, I do recall, I'm basically 3/8 German Danish. Okay. Through my maternal grandmother and by my other grandmother. Okay. My maternal grandmother was 100% Danish German, and my paternal grandmother was one quarter German. Yeah, one quarter German. No, one half German. Yeah, sorry, one half German. Yeah, she was Baldes Mannheim. Anyway, so I know the mentality. I know the mentality, and what's going on is that, see, the the German people are willing to make sacrifices at the behest of their social superiors. And that's why they have the booming economy that they have, because German workers are essentially slaves. Simple as that. Okay, it's not complicated, because they are willing slaves. I fucking lived in Germany. I know what I'm talking about. Okay, they are like that. You see some of the hip Germans, and you figure, no, they're not like that, but they are. They are so compliant. They are so willing to follow orders. Yeah, it's no accident that the Nazi ideology emerged there and was so effective, because the Germans are like that. It's always been the case. Okay. So anyway, the other loser is Australia and New Zealand, because they're at the doorstep of the Chinese, and they're not playing ball with the Chinese. And the Australians and the New Zealanders, they think that they're a big deal. They're not. They're pipsqueak. They're nobodies. Australia is a huge fucking continent, but how many fucking people live there, right? Yeah. How many people can actually exploit the enormous natural resources and whatnot? Not that many. See? And most of the fucking continent is a fucking desert anyway. Okay. And they think that they're hot shit. And the Chinese, as of late, have been really putting them in their place. And they're not happy about it, but they're realizing, oh, yeah, we are a little fucking pipsqueak, and China is a big wheel. And we better not fuck with them, or else they'll fuck with us bad and hurt us. See? So they're losing. I didn't get that much into Australia, New Zealand, but if you go into it and read about it, you'll see that they haven't been playing their cards very well as of late with the Chinese. Because, again, like it or not, the Chinese are the dominant power. And the Chinese Communist Party that is in control of China, they got the shit firmly in hand. Okay? Whatever bullshit somebody says, the Chinese Communist Party has that country in hand. And Putin and his United Russia Party, they have Russia in hand. And those two fucking groups of people are buddies now. And that's the key issue. That's the big winner. Russia, China. Because that de facto alliance is going to rule us over the next 50 years. Unless something catastrophic happens, I mean, something really out of fucking left field, Russia and China will continue to build more and more bridges, more and more assistance, mutual aid. I mean, they're never going to, merge into a single country. That's not going to happen. But that they are seeing each other as each other's future, which is what the leadership of both countries have been signaling relentlessly over the last year, and especially over the last 90 days, where the Chinese are seeing that Putin is not somebody to be fucked with. He can take care of his own, okay? And because of that, they're respecting him enormously. I mean, Putin, if you were to show up in Beijing now, they'd fuck up. They wouldn't roll out the red carpet. They'd roll out the gold carpet. Yeah, with fucking peons bowing before him and letting him walk over their bodies to shake hands with Xi, who would bow before him, because Putin clearly put away a major challenge to his power. And the Chinese respect that. They respect power. They respect somebody who knows how to wield power and can win. And Putin showed that. Showed that, Jesus fucking Christ, it was really fucking amazing. Okay? So the Chinese respect Russia. And this is key, by the way. If you've ever dealt with Chinese, which I have, see, they don't give a shit about liking you. They might like you very much and think that you're a fucking idiot. Okay? What they care about, what is important to them, is that they respect you, and they only respect power. They only respect somebody who is truly powerful. And Putin showed himself to be powerful. And that's a lesson that the Chinese will not forget. They will never have a falling out with Putin because they know he is their future. And they've been angling for this relationship with Russia for years. They finally have it. So the thought that the Chinese are going to somehow fuck up this relationship, you're out of your fucking mind. That's wishful thinking from Washington. Okay? Okay. The other issue is, the other big winner is Iran. Iran won in Yemen for the reasons I explained before. Iran supports Hamas winning there. Okay? It doesn't matter that Hamas are getting the shit kicked out of them by the Israeli. There is a perception that they are resisting the Israelis. Okay? Iran also won because the Americans are back at the table, at the negotiating table, to bring back the joint roadmap, the joint comprehensive plan of action, whatever it's called. You know what I'm talking about. The Russia treaty that everybody criticized and maligned. Doesn't matter what you think, if it was good for America or bad for America. The point is, see, if the Americans are back at the table to negotiate that fucking thing, that means Iran won. And Iran has weathered through all these sanctions and all this bullshit, getting cut out of SWIFT, the money exchange system, which the Russians have been threatened with being cut out with as well. All of this has led to Russia developing its own parallel system of money transfer. The Iranians are on board with it. Pretty soon the Chinese are going to be on board with it, because the Chinese are thinking the exact same thing. They don't want to be in a position where they are at war with America and America cuts them out of SWIFT, because America controls SWIFT. SWIFT is the system for money transfer around the world. Okay. So anyway, the point I want to make here is that, see, Russia, China, with Iran as a secondary ally, that's a powerful triumvirate, extremely powerful. And it will be inevitable that if these three powers solidify their alliance, and there is no reason to believe that they will not, and every indication that they will, well, it will be a natural thing for India and Pakistan to slowly but surely fall into the orbit of these powers. India, for sure, for the obvious reason that it has a huge human resource potential. And the other small nations in small but very powerful nations of Asia, well, they're all going to be falling in line soon enough. The Russia-China alliance is the future. And what happened in April solidified it. The other person who won is Putin, personally, because he's getting closer to his goal to repatriate those 20 to 30 million exiled Russians. He's also solidified his position inside Russia among the military, because it doesn't matter how many protests there are. If you have a military that's willing to go out on the street and shoot some protesters, you control the country. And the Russian military, if Putin asked them, go on the streets and just shoot your fellow Russians until I have things firmly in hand, they will fucking do it, because he's proven himself to be their leader. He's not going to fuck around. And Xi, the Chinese, they see Putin the same fucking way. So Putin won. Xi has also won, because his goal is increased Asian dominance and ultimate Chinese supremacy. Xi and the Chinese, the kind of Chinese Communist Party, they want to be the global hegemon, okay? They don't want to be patrolling and policing the world like the Americans do, but they want to be the big kahuna. It's very obvious that that's what they want. The fact that they are building such a huge navy, and of course they're making other efforts insofar as their armed forces is concerned, it all points to the same thing. They want to be the biggest, baddest, meanest motherfucker on the block. And they're getting there. Okay. I know I'm going on and on and on about this April offensive, but you have to understand how key it was, because it solidified this alliance. Because the Chinese, they wanted Russia, but they wanted to fuck her. They didn't really view Russia as an equal. But I think that what is key here, and which will emerge in the future, is that because of the April offensive and how Putin masterfully handled the situation, the Chinese view Putin and the Russians generally as people not to be trifled with. They might be, in terms of population, just a tenth of China, but they've got brains and they got balls, and they got the willingness to use both to achieve power. And that's something that the Chinese respect. And so that's why I think that this month of April was so crucial to that Russia-China alliance, because now it's going to be an alliance of equals, because Putin and the Russians have proven themselves more than a match to any challenge from the West, even a combined, coordinated challenge like the April offensive. And so, yeah, that's what I think is going on. And that's why the Russia-China alliance is so crucial now, because it's solidified and it will dominate at least for the next decade and a half to 2 decades, minimum, okay? Because whoever follows Putin as he passes away, inevitably, we all die, of course, whoever follows Putin and whoever follows Xi for the same reason, he will be replaced eventually when he passes away, as we all do. Well, those leaders, they're going to follow in Putin and Xi's footsteps, because the alliance between Russia and China will become more and more solidified by terms of trade and by simply the normal day-to-day interactions, because there will inevitably be frictions between the Russians and the Chinese. But if they have the overarching goal of being allies, whatever difficulties they encounter, they will both try to quickly smooth them away. And they will naturally fall into the habit of like, okay, I'll take this one and you take the next one. And the next one comes and this one's yours because the last one was mine. But the one after that, please give it to me. That kind of give and take in a historic alliance. You look at the great alliances of the past, for instance, the US-British alliance, or the French-German alliance in the post-war period. There was always that give and take, always letting one side win one and the other side taking the other. And you're going to see that more and more with China and Russia whenever they have a difference of opinion. And whenever one of them is threatened, the other will immediately be on side cheerleading their guy, as we saw the Chinese cheerleading the Russians. And I want you guys to pay attention to this International Aviation Committee investigation of the Belarusian, of the flight from Greece to Lithuania or Latvia or wherever the fuck it was, that was brought down over Belarus so that they could arrest that dissident. It's led by a Chinese guy. Watch carefully that decision. If it goes Belarus's way, then you know for a fact that what I'm telling you is what's going on. The Chinese and the Russians are not just in bed together, they are fucking married and they're having a baby. Okay, so that's my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. And let me just see if everything's going well. Hang on. Let me turn on the camera here. There we go. So give me a +1 if you guys heard me up until now. I'm looking at the chat and it seems that everything is copacetic. So hit me with a +1 if you heard up to here. And of course, let me invite you all to join in the conversation. I'm posting the link to join right now. I just posted it. And +1, great, fantastic. And so there you see it. I'm highlighting it. Oops, sorry, I hit the wrong one. There we go. There's the StreamYard link, T82A66MXPA. That's the link to join. And I'd love to have you on and shoot the shit for a while. I'm not going to do it as long as I've done it other times, because to tell you the truth, I'm a bit exhausted. It's 10 to 8 my time. And yeah, it was a little bit longer than I anticipated. But I hope that you got the main gist of what's going on. And yeah, this was a big fucking deal. Okay. So yeah, I just want you to know that. Alex Shivago, how's it going?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine. What's up, man?
Yeah, real quick. I think the international aviation thing was called ICAO.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yep, that's it. And it's a Chinese guy that runs it, you said?
I do believe he's the chairman of the investigative body. I don't know the overall leader, but of the investigative body, I think that he's a Chinese national. Actually, I'm almost positive he is.
I have to look into that. It's really interesting. My question is, because the United States is still a military power, which is why we're still considered, I guess, a first world country. In the future, what do you think will happen with all that military potential that the United States has? Is it going to be dismantled by other countries? I mean, we do have some of the top aircraft in the world. We have the strongest Navy as of the moment. What do you see happening with that? Do you see that being sold off?
I have no idea. No idea whatsoever. I mean, I'm not being facetious or anything of the sort. I have no fucking idea what will happen to all that military potential. You use it or you lose it, I guess. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But I think that the itch to use it is overwhelming. The Americans want to use it. There's a certain neocon segment of the leadership that wants to get into a war with China or Russia or both. It's that McCain faction. It's the insecurity of the little man. McCain, I despise him, by the way. I mean, I really hate that fucker. That guy was a fucking piece of shit as far as I'm concerned. Okay.
You're referring to the president candidate, John McCain?
I beg your, yeah. Because all he wanted was just to go to war, you know? So anyway, but that's a certain mentality, American mentality, that I've always despised. An arrogance disguised as pragmatism, because one of the great qualities of Americans as a people is a pragmatic approach to things. You know, the philosophical school of pragmatism was invented in America, and it stood America in good stead during the 18th century, the 19th century, and the first half of the 20th century. But it was starting in the 60s that they got arrogant, you know. And John McCain is a classic example of that. And there are a lot of people in the leadership in Washington that just want to go to war because they think that they deserve to be on top. And nobody deserves to be on top. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So anyway, what else is on your mind?
Well, I think based off what I said earlier, I think the military is going to be heavily defunded by the current administration, and then whatever's leading into the future following that administration. And then it will just kind of whittle away, and then maybe be some of our military potential will be sold off because they see it as an asset that could be sold for money, you know, that they'll export some.
I don't know about that, but I do know that they are purging the American military of anybody who's a MAGA or a nationalist. Now, I think that that's fucking insane because, see, in the military, you want to have your nationalists.
Exactly.
Because they're going to be motivated. Getting rid of them and putting in like a bunch of fucking trannies and shit is not going to fucking help the American military. In fact, it's going to demoralize it. But what the fuck do I know? You know, I mean, I never served in the military, so what do I know? But I mean, just as a purely just just glancing at the problem, making the American military more woke is not going to solve any fucking problem. But yeah, I think that America would not win another war. You know, they couldn't fucking win in Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria. You think that they could really win against a real army that knows what the fuck it's doing, like the Chinese or the Russians? The Russians, man, Jesus Christ, man, they scare the shit out of you. Okay, those fuckers, those fuckers eat, rabid dogs for breakfast and shit them out by lunchtime. You know what I'm saying? They are bad motherfuckers. So yeah, I don't know, but we'll see. We'll see. Anyway,
hey, thank you for going on the Fresh and Fit podcast. That was great, man. You should do it again.
Oh yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah, I don't know if I ranted too much. I hope I didn't. But people seem to.
That's why we listen.
Okay, then I'll rant some more. Yeah, why not? Yeah. Anyway, Alex, thanks for joining, man. I really appreciate it. Take it easy.
Bye.
Bye. Hey, Chriso, how's it going?
It's going well, Coach. Thanks for the quite intense seminar.
I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got some insights or knowledge out of it, or at least an opinion that you can work off of and figure out your own point of view.
Very much so. I mean, I try to follow international relations, but I missed the whole April offensive. You put it into context, and it's indeed quite important.
Yeah, it was extremely important. And I think that, like I said, historians will look back on that month as one of the most important in recent history. Yeah, that's my thinking.
Two quick questions. One is about the regions you did not mention, including Africa and South America.
Mm-hmm.
Do they matter?
They don't matter. Not now.
Okay.
Not now. I mean, both continents have always been fairly isolated from the rest of the world. Okay. They're important insofar as natural resources are concerned. But see, even though the United States has a lot of troops in Africa, there isn't any clear direct competition between American interests and Chinese interests. The Americans have, for all intents and purposes, ceded Africa to the Chinese, and the Chinese are doing what they do best, which is lending money and building infrastructure and creating the conditions whereby they will own that infrastructure in the future, which is their whole goal, right? And so they are taking over Africa, not because they give a shit about Africans. They don't. Chinese are notoriously racist and really hate Africans. And this is true, by the way. But they view Africa as just this colossal land full of natural resources that they very badly want, and they want to exploit it. Okay, that's what they're doing, and they're doing it very successfully. And insofar as Latin America is concerned, they view it in similar terms, but they realize that the Latin Americans are more sophisticated and harder a lot of times to get on their side, because in Africa it's fairly easy to pay them off, to bribe them. Whereas in Latin America, it's not that the Latin Americans are harder to bribe, but it's harder to bribe the right guy to control the situation, because power tends to be more diffuse in Latin American countries. See? And so, yeah, that I think is their problem. I mean, there are some countries where they can't bribe anybody, like in Chile. They tried. I saw them. Okay. But in other countries, like in Argentina, which is bribe city, right? The whole fucking country is on the take. The whole fucking country is on the take in Argentina. But it's so diffuse. The power is ever shifting that you bribe one guy on a Monday, and by Friday, you have to bribe somebody else. And so in the end, it's kind of like not worth it. You see what I'm saying? And
Makes
so,
sense.
yeah. And so the Chinese, they're finding that situation insofar as Latin America is concerned. But to go back to your original point, do they matter at this time? No, they don't. They're so peripheral that they're inconsequential.
Makes sense. Second question is, what do you think is the impact of the economic collapse, especially in the US, due to the lockdowns? How will that change the dynamic in the future?
Rephrase your question, please.
How will America's economic decline caused by lockdowns impact the future of not only the West's demise, but also the Russian-Chinese alliance?
It's medium term, it's not going to affect them at all because of the sanctions. See? Because think of it. Suppose I'm your drug dealer. Okay, I got you hooked on heroin, say, and I'm your drug dealer, and I tell you, hey man, Chris, if you don't give me, whatever the fuck that I want, then I'm going to cut your drug supply, right? So what do? You do what I say, but at the same time, you're like, Jesus Christ, man, I don't want to fucking do this thing, and then I give you some drugs, and then I cut you off again for some arbitrary reason. What are you going to wind up doing? You're going to get another fucking drug dealer. That's what you're going to do. Right. And so when I start like threatening your drug supply, you're going to be like, fuck you, CRP. I don't need your heroin anymore because I found some other dealer. You see, this is what sanctions did by overuse. By overusing the sanctions and be willing to use especially key infrastructure such as SWIFT, because SWIFT, the financial system whereby banks transfer money among each other, by threatening people to cut them off from SWIFT, it incentivized them to create alternatives to SWIFT. Okay, and so I think that the Chinese Russian alliance, if there's a complete collapse of the American economy, will not be that affected. And in fact, I think that if the Chinese especially see this is coming, this American collapse, they will accelerate it by dumping their bonds, dumping their treasury holdings. I mean, it's what I would do. If I see that, I mean, think about it. I own a lot of your debt, and I see that you're about to go bankrupt. What do? I sell your debt. I sell it to the highest bidder as quickly as possible. And I'm willing to take a loss because, see, it's better to lose, 10 or 20 or even 30 or even 40%, hell, 50%, than to lose it all. You see? And so I think that if the Chinese especially that own so much treasury debt, if they see that the United States is going down the tubes, they'll sell out their positions and thereby give the American collapse a very hard push.
Doesn't the U.S. take that into consideration when dealing with the Chinese? Did the Chinese have that sort of weapon?
I don't think that the people running shit have taken it into consideration or even realize it. Wow. They're so arrogant and blind. That's my thinking. Because these people are fucking stupid. You got to understand something. That's something that's hard to understand. But people like John Brennan and whatnot, all these fucking people, they're dumb. Okay, you got to understand that they're not like geniuses. Okay, they're not people who are smart. Okay, and so I don't think that they've counted on that or realize it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Coach. Two quick comments before I go. You mentioned it will be difficult to sabotage Nord Stream 2. I saw an article in the Spiegel this week about all of a sudden they're talking about all the leftover World War II munitions, at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. Here's a way out,
Oh no, I think that's it's just because they're digging to make the pipeline that they're coming across all that shit. I don't think that it's like like a signal that they're going to like by accident blow up something. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't think so. And by the way, it's still in. I mean, anything could happen. Okay, but I don't think that that's really going to happen.
Okay.
And by the way, there's something else. If Nord Stream 2 works out like it should, they're going to build Nord Stream 3 and 4 real fucking quick. Of course, So yeah, it'll just be the more the merrier. And if it's more such pipelines, it'll be that much harder to interrupt the supply of gas to Germany. And by the way, if Nord Stream 2 were to be interrupted by some explosion, you have to understand that the Germans would get to the very bottom of who did it. Sorry for the pun, but they would do everything in their power to find out who did it. And whoever did it, they'd fuck them over bad. Because, see, the Germans need this, okay? They need it. And so if you fuck with something like that, if like the Americans were to do some like stupid CIA op or something absurd like that, right? If they were to do that, the Germans would never forgive them, okay? Because the Germans would find out, because that kind of shit, you always find out who did it. And they'd find out who did it, and they would never forgive him.
Makes sense. So thank you very much, Coach. And would you mind devoting one of your videos or seminars to the issue of renewable energy, which you haven't?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. I'll do renewable energy. I think it's a bullshit.
I mean, there was that Michael Moore film that came out last year, the year before, the Planet of the Humans. Do you mind expanding on that and in your own experience? That would be a fascinating topic. Thank you.
Sure. No problem. Thanks, Chris. I'm so glad to have you on again. Take it easy.
Thank you. Bye.
Let's see. I got Italo here. Italo, are you there? Italo? You're muted, buddy. Oh, where'd he go? Where'd he go? Shit. He disappeared. Okay, let's bring on Pierre. Pierre, how's it going?
How's it, Coach?
Yeah, can you turn down the volume because I hear my voice echoing.
My own volume.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, you gotta wear headphones. Yeah, you gotta wear headphones, man. Yeah. So anyway, what's on your mind?
Is it? Is my volume? Is it giving problems again?
Yeah. Tell me the question.
No, I just want to say congratulations with the 3,000 followers on Patreon. You see, that's quite.
Oh yeah, it's pretty funny.
Quite an achievement, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's. I haven't done anything special. All I did was just produce consistent content. And ultimately, that it seems to me, is the secret of success on that particular platform, of just being consistent. And that's why I was so upset with myself last Sunday when I had to postpone, and then I ghosted on you guys on Monday. It was just not my intention at all. And I was very upset about it and I'm glad that you guys understood that it wasn't something I wanted. Because in this kind of platform, all you need to do is be consistent, Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're definitely contributing a lot to the community, and thanks, and I'll raise a glass to that.
Thanks very much, man. I'll raise my coffee mug.
Yeah. Coach, I just have two questions. One is a YouTube question, and the other one is the one about the European woman. First, I just want to share. I want to share with you that you were actually an inspiration to me to start like a YouTube channel, and and then yeah, it's also because I'm like a erased father or a alienated father, so I kind of started like a YouTube thing for my daughter, and talk about the corruption in the children's court or the family court and stuff.
That's really tough. That's really tough.
And yeah, it's not, it's a very dark channel. It's not very entertaining and stuff. So I don't
Why don't you
get.
do this? When you post it in the chat and I'll highlight it.
Okay, I will share the link, but
And what's your
so
other?
but what I wanted to tell you is I was doing an experiment last night because my audience is very small, and it's not something that I want to share with all my friends and family and stuff. It's actually the people that need the help. So I did this. I don't really have subscribers, so I did an experiment. Last night there was this boxing match in South Africa between two celebrities. The one is a rugby player, a Springbok rugby player, and the other one is a rock star. So then I recorded this fight, and then I shared it, and then I my channel like got, I don't have subscribers, and I got like 4,000 hits or views in 10 hours.
Great,
So
great.
so yeah, that then I doubled my subscribers today. It was
Great.
just like an experiment. But the other thing I want to ask you, I also made a video and YouTube took it down. And then I also followed the BitChute route, and I posted the video on BitChute, and there's no subscribers, but the views is like double on BitChute than it is on YouTube. Why is that?
Then continue in BitChute then. Because probably YouTube is just not showing your content, and people on BitChute are more receptive to your content. You know, and you got to keep in mind that a lot of men's rights activists are on BitChute a lot more than YouTube, and so that's why it'll happen. Yeah. So anyway, Pierre, thanks very much, and yeah, good luck with your channel. Why don't you post it in the chat? And what I'll do is I'll highlight it. Post the link to your channel on the chat, and I'll highlight it so it'll be on screen, so other people can join it. Okay?
Okay, thanks very much. I appreciate.
Well, my pleasure, man. Take it easy. Hey, Turnier, how's it going?
Hey, Coach. Thanks for another great webinar. I'm not really privy to international affairs, so thanks for bringing me up to speed in plain terms.
No, my pleasure, man. My pleasure.
Awesome. I had a couple of questions. Is this Russian-China-Iran alliance, is that going to be a threat to the petrodollar? And I do have like a quick anecdote. I was at a conference recently, and there was a former U.S. military person who suggested that the Middle East will start to put together a basket of currencies, kind of like the euro, and start promoting the Iraqi dinar as something that can compete with the dollar. And Russia and China are going to do something to prevent it. Of course, this is just an anecdote, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts as to, is there going to be a threat to the petrodollar?
Well, see, I don't know. I mean, honest to God, I don't know. I just know that the situation is incredibly fluid at this time. And it's fluid because America is like decaying. And there is clearly, for the foreseeable future, no clear leadership. And a lot of people say that Donald Trump could run in 2024 and save us all. I don't think so. I think he'll frankly be too old and not have the energy to do it. And even if he were to win, I don't think he'd do much, because he sure as shit didn't do much in the 2017 to 2021 when he was president. So I don't have any faith in Donald Trump. There's a power vacuum in America. There's no strong leadership. And a lot of institutions in America are completely demoralized. And so I do not see the United States like getting back on top. And I do see a lot of different ways that American leadership could fuck things up. And one way could be that they fuck up the petrodollar, but it could be also that they manage to continue with the petrodollar, essentially oil backing the dollar in terms of value. So anything can happen. And I wouldn't be surprised by anything. That's why right now, rather than have like what I think will happen, I'm just keeping my eyes open and just like following everything and trying to understand what's going on. That's why for me, it was important to do this particular video, because I really wanted to talk to you about this April offensive. That once you see it in these terms, that it all these different things were happening at the same time as like a coordinated offensive against Russia, and it failed. And instead of hurting Russia, it strengthened its alliance with China, which is the upshot of this presentation, and strengthened the Russia-China alliance to the detriment of America and Europe. Yeah, see, that's what I wanted to highlight in this presentation. Now, what's going to happen? It's speculation, man. It could be anything at all.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for your thoughts on that.
No problem.
The second question I had, so the second question that I had was if you could expand on India's role in all this. My understanding is that they're allies with the U.S.
Yes.
They've always been fighting with Pakistan for a long time.
Yes.
And they've sided with China. I'm curious to hear what can bring them into the fold of the whole alliance here.
Well, India historically has been one of the non-aligned nations, right? But they always had fairly decent relationship with the Soviet Union, and currently have fairly decent relationships with Russia. Now, they've always had some issues with China insofar as the border, and with Pakistan insofar as the border. But see, the Russians and the Chinese sorted out their border issues. They were equally serious. At one point, the Chinese and the Russians almost came to a nuclear war in the 1960s. It's something that in the West is not known very much about, and it's fairly shadowy. But there came a point where they were, in the Soviet Kremlin, they were advocating just nuking China over some piddly-ass border issue that they had. But they sorted them out. And I think that experience of cooperating to sort out that kind of really paltry border issue, because it really is, and the shit going on in Kashmir between Pakistan and India is also, it's piecemeal. It's penny ante shit, right? I think that the Chinese and the Russians might be the perfect intermediaries to sort out the Pakistani-Indian thing and bring both countries, Pakistan and India, into the fold, into the Russia-China fold. And so I think that's something that you should expect, because see, India's value is indisputable. Pakistan has value, not so much as India, because just by virtue of having a smaller population and not so educated a population. But India is valuable because of the human resources. And so the Chinese and the Russians would see value in ironing out the problems between Pakistan and India to their benefit. But I think that would be far down the line. It would be in several years from now, because I think that right now the Chinese and the Russians, they're going to be busy trying to figure out their modus vivendi between the two of them first. Because in outline, in principle, they understand the relationship. China provides a huge market, and Russia provides natural resources and technology. And so that bringing those two things together, what each side can offer the other, it's going to take some time, inevitably. Okay, it's just the natural time necessary to build a partnership. But in 5 to 10 years, when all those relatively small issues between China and Russia are really ironed out, and it's really a frictionless relationship, then they'll be turning their attention more systematically to the other countries. Because see, I think the key issue to understand is that the Russians and the Chinese realize that in our current environment, you can't walk around with the stick all the time. In fact, don't bother carrying the stick. Everybody knows that you have a stick. Just show up with kind words and a carrot. See? And that'll get you a lot farther. And I think that what they've learned from the American experience is that the Americans kept wielding the stick and hitting people left, right, and center. And ultimately, it just weakened them. See? And I think that the Russians and the Chinese are realizing that the smart move is not to play. The smart move is to be patient, take your time, and eventually you'll get what you want, because it's worked for both of them. The Russians prove, though, that when you have to act decisively. If you got to break some plates, break them. Don't go half-assed about it. Just go ahead and do it, and go out and grab what you want. And I'm impressed by Vladimir Putin. What can I say? The guy really, really came across, and he won so huge this past April. I mean, if I were him, man, I'd be breaking open the champagne every night, man, because this fucker really came across. And the Chinese, they know that this is the guy, and they are going to stick with him. Because, see, it's not that the Chinese respect strength, but they will always test him. No, because they recognize that a strong ally can often need help. And you, if you're allied to a strong man, you give him that help, because he might be weak in a particular moment or whatnot, but he's always going to be basically strong. And so that is going to be the Chinese attitude towards Putin. They will always support him. Will always give him their support. And I think that this victory of Putin's in the April offensive will make that support of his, for all intents and purposes, unconditional. And I think that that's a huge win for Putin. I mean, and a huge win for Russia. Mm-hmm. I think that Russia is. A lot of people say that Russia's population is slowing down or becoming smaller, shrinking, and whatnot. I think that we might be touching bottom insofar as Russia is concerned, and it could be that in the years to come it really takes off. I could be totally wrong, but there's that vibe that, you know, they're coming around. It's hard to explain, but it's just a vibe. And like I say, I could be completely wrong. I'm fucking so often wrong about shit, and you guys know that. But that's the vibe I'm getting at this time, man. What the hell? Yeah. What do you mean to say?
Yeah. No, this is really fascinating. I'm really curious to see how everything unfolds from here on.
Me too. I want to know the next episode. Yeah, fuck yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting.
I wish I could, download the next episode, but just have to wait around for it. It sucks.
Well, thank you for taking my questions. No, this has been great. I've been a subscriber for years on YouTube and subscribed on Patreon for about a year. So it's been really excellent content. Really appreciate everything you do.
I thank goodness. I'm so glad. Yeah, because like I say, the important thing for me is that you, as a subscriber, feel that you are getting your money's worth. Okay, because I don't want thank you for your charity. No, I'm providing a service. Content that I hope is good and insightful, and I'm really glad to hear that. So thank you so much. I very much appreciate it. Take it easy, Turner.
Thanks.
Hey, Serene, how's it going? Hello, Serene. No, Serene. I'll pull it.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now.
I don't have a question. I'm just following your webinar.
Oh, okay. So you were on, so I figured that you had a question. Wait, who was I talking to? Was it Bill? Bill, was that you or Serene? I have you both on screen right now.
No, that was me. Theron doesn't have a question. I'm just following the webinar.
Oh, okay. So Bill, then I'll ask you to step out of the... Bill, you don't have a question, or you do have a question?
No, I don't have a question. I was talking to myself, actually. I don't have a question at this time.
Okay. Do you have a comment or anything?
Okay, I do have a comment. I'm surprised that there are a number of topics you haven't touched on.
Go ahead.
Just real fast. America is self-sufficient. Do we really need the world? At one time, we needed to import oil, but now we have our own oil.
Not anymore.
I'm listening to people say that we're self-sufficient. We really don't. We could step away from the world stage and we'd be self-sufficient. That's just one topic. Another one, the real flashpoint between America and Russia is the North Pole area and garnering. The Russians seem to want to take over the North Pole, and they got to share it with Canada, the United States. Another topic you haven't touched on is the water wars. There's the problem in the Horn of Africa with a dam that would impact the Egyptians, and the Chinese are building dams that would impact their neighbors, especially India and Vietnam. I'm just a little bit surprised you haven't touched on any of those factors. So
well, okay,
that was just a comment.
Yeah, let's go piece by piece. The fact of America being independent doesn't need anybody. That's objectively not true. Okay, first of all, the oil issue. When fracking was going on, when it was being allowed, then yeah, the United States was a net exporter of oil. It was oil independent, but that got shut down now, didn't it? So that's not happening anymore. That was a political decision on the Biden administration's part. Okay, so there's that issue. The other issue is the United States depends on foreign produced goods. And an example, a clear, obvious example is semiconductors. They're produced in Taiwan. And right now, because of the pandemic, those factories in Taiwan shut down. And what's happening to all the production lines of Teslas, of air conditioning units, of farm equipment? They're all waiting around. I saw this video of this truck stop in the middle of fucking nowhere where there was filled with all these trucks and they were waiting for parts. And these were like relatively minor parts for these trucks, but they were all dependent on semiconductors. Yeah. And there were parts that were like a couple $100, $300, but no semiconductors, no parts. Therefore, the trucks weren't fucking running. They were just sitting there, parked. Okay. Now that shows that the United States cannot be aloof to the world. The neoliberal paradigm of globalization and using economies of comparative advantage, rather, to outsource manufacturing and send the manufacturing of key components to cheaper labor areas has made the United States intrinsically dependent on the rest of the world. If trade with the rest of the world cut off suddenly, the United States would be in a dark ages for at least 3 years while it's struggled to rebuild any kind of a manufacturing infrastructure to replace the goods that are no longer being imported. See? And that's a fact. And like I said, the shortage of semiconductors because of the shutdown of the factories in Taiwan proves this. Okay? I don't have to, show off any kind of fancy charts or statistics. You can see it right away. Cars, Teslas, they're not being manufactured because of this shit. Okay? Now, what was the other point? Oh, yeah, the
North Pole and the water wars.
Okay, yeah, but before I go in there, I have to emphasize, Americans who think that they don't need the rest of the world, you're blind. You yourself created the conditions where you depend on the rest of the world for key components, for key goods and services. You yourself did this by way of globalization. And Ross Perot warned about it back in 1990, and he was dead right. And he was mocked relentlessly by everybody, except people who had a little bit more fucking foresight. Frankly, I voted for Perot. Well, I didn't vote for Perot because he wasn't in the general election, but
the one percenters did it because they got filthy rich. The middle class and the working class got hammered real hard.
Yeah, exactly right. And see, it was America's decision. Okay. And well, that's, you make your bed, you got to sleep in it. You know what I'm saying? So to pretend that the United States can be aloof from the rest of the world, no. And it doesn't matter about the oil because there are lots of other shit that's being produced elsewhere, not in America, that America needs. Okay. And so that's the reality. And that's why the Americans got themselves into this pickle. And that's why my thinking is that eventually, and this is speculative, but eventually the rest of the world is going to tell America, fuck you. We're not going to sell you shit. And that's when America is going to be up shit's creek. That's my thinking at this point. Okay. And if the dollar breaks, the rest of the world will not sell them goods and services. And that's when the whole shit show goes up in flames. That's why I'm so concerned about this burgeoning inflation, because it incentivizes other countries not to accept dollars, because who wants to accept a depreciating currency? Nobody. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, that's the thing. Now, about the North Pole, that's trivial. It's in the global scheme of things, it's trivial. It's not a particularly important issue. Okay. Nobody's ever going to go to war over the North Pole and the fucking polar bears and fucking seals or whatever the fuck is up there. Nobody's going to care. At most they'll have diplomatic tit for tat and like more sanctions, but nobody's ever going to go and shoot somebody over the fucking polar bears. Okay. Simple as that. And there's not enough oil that's easily extractable. I mean, do you have any idea how hard it is to get oil out of the out of the North Pole in that area? It's fucking impossible. Okay, so nobody's going to go to war. And therefore, since nobody's going to go to war over some shit, it's trivial. They were willing to go to war over Ukraine. That's why it matters. See? Interestingly enough, as a side note about that whole Ukrainian thing, I was watching the exchange rate like a hawk. Everybody in Ukraine knew that there was going to be no war, that the West was going to chicken out. And I knew it because the exchange rate never varied. It was steady as a rock insofar as the euro and as far as the dollar. The hryvnia, which is the local currency in Ukraine, it was at 28 hryvnia to the dollar steady and 33 hryvnia to the euro steady. They knew that nothing was going to happen, and nothing happened. So lots of times the locals know best, and that's why I was confident that there'd never be a war. Now, what was your third point? You mentioned
water.
This time,
in a couple of places on the planet.
Yeah. In a couple of places, yeah. Well, actually, there are lots of places. Like one of the big problems in Israel is the water issue. Okay, they have constant issues with the water, which people outside of Israel don't seem to understand. But in Israel, it's one of the principal problems of the situation with the Israeli Arabs and the people that they have cordoned off in Gaza. And so, anyway, the water issue at this time, again, it's not that important. And Russia has some of the largest aquifers in the world and easy access to them. So for Russia and therefore for China, it's a non-issue. Okay. And so there are some hot spots here and there where it's an issue, but in general, again, it's like, okay, some poor people in Africa, it's horrifying. Poor people, they're suffering and they're dying perhaps because they don't have water, but who gives a shit? It's poor shithole in Africa. Nobody cares. I mean, that's the reality of it. China is like damming up some river and diverting water and, leaving a drought in its wake to some other country. Who gives a shit? I mean, if it were like fucking Austria, then people would care. But it's like, I don't know, Zambia or someplace like that, someplace I've never heard of. Who cares? It's awful, but that's the reality.
It's a possibility it could create local wars in that part of the world. That's all. That was the point. Yeah,
but so they've been killing each other there forever. And it's never really mattered to the rest of the world. When the Rwanda genocide happened, famously, they killed more people faster than any other time in human history since the dropping of the atomic bomb. And nobody cared. There were no protests. No, nothing happened. Yeah. That's the reality, because in certain places around the world, they've been killing each other since forever. And they always will. And it's ultimately never going to matter. I mean, it's a tragedy and it sounds heartless, but I'm just being pragmatic. See, I sometimes pragmatism requires you to have a little bit of a hard heart and understand that sometimes something awful is happening, but who gives a shit?
Okay. Thanks for picking me. Good talking to you.
All right, great talking to you, man. Take it easy, Bill. Daniel S., how's it going?
Oh my God.
Daniel, you there?
Hello.
Hey, how's it going, Daniel?
Didn't know if you could hear me or not. Well, that's
fine. What's up?
Well, that's the first seminar that I attended. I just got my Patreon subscription like 2 weeks ago.
Oh.
Well, I'm watching your videos for a year or two. I don't know. Since almost the beginning, anyway. Yeah. And
thank you so much. I appreciate it, man. What's on your mind?
Thanks for the information as well. Well, the point is that I totally agree with your views regarding China and Russia and how things evolve in this direction. Mm-hmm. Just as I said in the chat, my question is actually, how can we benefit from this evolution of things? And I'm asking both on a personal level and as a small business owner. I mean, I own a digital marketing agency. Mm-hmm. And I was starting to try to target
Where are you?
Chinese companies. Well, at the moment, I'm in Romania. Uh-huh. I basically, I'm till the pandemic, I was in London, but came in Romania now. So I'm doing the operation from here right now.
Do you speak Russian?
Unfortunately, no. Or at least not yet.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it would be smart to learn Russian, quite frankly. I mean, you're a young guy?
Well, I don't know. I'm 34 at the moment.
Okay. Well, see, I mean, first of all, you should never aim for a particular market, like a country. Like, say, I'm going to go for the Chinese market. You got to be like more specific. You got to like this group of people or that group of people. You know?
Yeah, the industry, obviously. Yeah.
But yeah, it seems to me that the Chinese Russia economy, that's the future. You know, I mean, that's what it seems so like to me. Okay, I'm probably going to be in Russia in a week or so, and yeah, and I'll tell you more about it once I'm there. But I do believe that it's the future. I mean, looking at it from the outside, okay, I think that Russia-China alliance, it's the future, and I think that there are going to be more opportunities in Russia as China opens up more to Russia in terms of its economy, because that's inevitably in the cards. The Russians are going to say, look, we're on board with you, but you got to give us more of your market. And the Chinese are going to say, hey, these guys are a tenth of our size in terms of population. So if we open up our market completely to them, it'll never really hurt us. So they'll go, okay, you're on, you know. And the Chinese, they're ruthless business people, so they're not going to be afraid of like Russian gangsters or Russian oligarchs or any shit like that, right? So yeah, my thinking is that as time progresses, you know, you're going to see more and more, like some sort of. They already have sort of like a semi-free trade zone between the two of them, but it'll just open up more. It's just going to be more and more. That's my thinking. And so if you can get more on the ground floor in Russia, you might be able to help yourself more to the Chinese market. But I don't know your business at all, so that's something that's on you. You got to figure that out.
Yeah.
I can't.
Well, I'd like to add 2 or 3 things, if that's okay.
Sure.
The first one is yeah, for the Europeans, in my opinion, the Russian market and the Chinese market are quite difficult to penetrate. You know, so obviously I'll try to get a partner or two. So I'll send a couple of emails and I'll get some people on LinkedIn, you know, to see how things are, and they are interested to get a partner and see basically to see how they see things. The second thing that I want to add is that I don't know, trading cryptocurrency on my own time and keeping up to date with all the developments. I'm totally impressed with the level of the Chinese achievement in artificial intelligence, in virtual reality and blockchain. Obviously, I mean, I think they are over US right now. So this almost came out of nowhere, but that's what I think. And the third thing that I want to add is that I see a small problem in this China and Russia cooperation, basically because the Chinese, there are way so many, and Russia have so much territory. And the point is that I think Russia is afraid that if they will open the borders, a lot of Chinese people will come, because, you know, a lot of people there and small territory.
No. I don't think that's a concern for the Russians. Okay, do keep in mind that the in terms of average wages, they're if I recall, they're kind of comparable. Okay, so there wouldn't be that incentive for the Chinese to flood into Russia seeking work opportunities. As tourists, sure, which is fine, because tourists come and then they go and they leave their money.
Yeah,
but as going there as a worker to stay, I don't think that the Chinese have any incentive in that regard. And learning Russian in order to do that, there's no incentive, you know. And there is lots of work in China to soak up that Chinese unemployment. So I don't think that that's going to happen. I don't think it's a concern, or not a realistic concern, insofar as Russia is concerned. Okay, I think that it would be in the reverse. I think the Chinese would be very worried about a flood of Russians going to China. Okay. So I think that their incentive would be, the Chinese incentive would be to shore up the Russian economy by as much investment as they possibly could, so as to incentivize Russians to stay in Russia, which is, of course, Putin's program as well. So I don't see the Chinese invading the Russians, and the Russians might try to invade the Chinese, but the Chinese will make every effort to keep the Russians there, but not efforts in a violent way or exclusionary way, but rather in an incentivized way.
Yeah, obviously, because they don't want to break the alliance. That's obviously.
Yeah, because it's to their benefit. It's to their benefit.
Yeah, but okay, but in my opinion, how do you think China will solve this territory issue? I mean, there are way so many people there, and the space, the territory, it's not so much. So I mean,
China is huge. If you ever seen a map of China, it's fucking enormous. Okay. And so no, that's not a problem, because the problem that the Chinese are having is that they have so many people from the countryside in Chinese countries who are flooding to the cities on the coast and somewhat inland, right? And so that's the problem they have. But the idea of Chinese going to Russia, and do keep in mind, when you talk about Russia, you look at the map and you see it's enormous, right?
Yeah.
But it's nothing. It's derelict. There's nothing, no infrastructure, nothing. Okay. It's a flat wasteland. It's essentially a desert. Okay. It doesn't have sand. It's not that fucking hot, or at least not during most of the year, but it's just empty wasteland. Okay. So, and nothing fucking grows on it. So no, that's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen. There's no incentive. There's no incentive. Okay. Okay, Daniel, great talking to you, man. Take it easy.
Yeah, thank you, and please keep us updated with the things that you do in Russia, and what's your opinion on that, and how are things there.
I will. As soon as I get there, I'll post something about it. Take it easy, man.
Thank
you. Marcus, how's it going?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you fine. What's on your mind, man?
Yeah, first, nice following. Seriously, I've been following for some years. Been in Asia since 16 until the pandemic, and with all the stuff that's going on in Europe, you kind of kept us sane. Not just me, but like some of my friends as well. I do have some experience actually.
I kept you sane.
Yeah, seriously.
Dude,
like the thing is,
your life is misery.
No. Seriously, like so. Let me quickly give you a background. So actually, I studied in Beijing, like same university Xi Jinping studied. My girlfriend is also from there. We were actually in China last year for the pandemic, right? Living there, left actually because that was Spring Festival, right?
Mm-hmm.
And given the pictures we saw on like Weibo, which is like kind of the Twitter and like WeChat, right? We were like, yeah, this is from a lab. Let's leave. But we thought we would be back by summer, right? The issue is obviously that didn't happen, right? So like for the time being, like basically like most of the Westerners have left Far East Asia and even Southeast Asia, like back to like New Zealand, Australia, Europe, US. And it's actually difficult to go back right now. So like this is the one thing, and actually I think my questions connect to Daniel. Sorry?
Are you Chinese?
No, I'm not Chinese. Okay. I'm European. And for the time being, I'm in Europe as well, working on my second citizenship, because I mean, like, it's like, yeah, right now it's difficult to travel. So I think it makes sense, right? And I think they're connecting to Daniel's questions, like between Russia and China, right? So like the way I see China these days actually is like a lot of young people, they actually like the country like a lot, right? So like the CCP has done great and like encouraging like the nationalism, like the economy in a sense, right? But they are starting to shut off like more and more from the Western sphere in a sense, obviously because we push them as well, right? But like it's getting extremely difficult actually to both get visas, as well as like even if you actually live in China, like to just like extend visas, right? Like in the past, there was like this easy like English teaching stuff, like a lot of like Westerners did that. It's almost impossible, right? Russia, like on the other side, I actually see like that, and this is my first question, basically, like I actually see like, because like I'm into citizenship, like I'm checking like how I can get multiple of those, right? I actually see Russia like incentivizing actually like Western, not just like European, but like Western people actually coming to Russia, right? And like I think this also goes like into the ideology of like basically like Eastern Europe or like Russia in terms of like not wokeism and like the whole like wokeism like Western Europe and like the US, right? So like how can we, and that's like the first question basically, like more broad, right? Like more broad, like how can we like as like Western young guys see benefit, right? Be it for marriage. I mean, as I said, I have a Chinese like girlfriend. She actually pushes for marriage, which like at my age right now, 26, like not really like a fan of that, but so let's see. But the connections she has are already damn good. As well as like for citizenship, as well as like for business, right? How do you see that like in the next, because like I think 5 to 10 years, like because like in my worldview, like I was very blessed to travel like a lot before COVID happened, and that's like nearly impossible now, right? I mean, you can go to like Mexico, or you can go to like Indonesia with like business visa on Bali and stuff, but it's very restricted, right? Compared to before, you just show out the border, show your passport. That's it. 26.
Yeah,
and I work like remotely. Sorry.
Your girlfriend is 26 too?
She's 25. She's 25.
Okay.
But she went to the same university, same like I actually like Xi Jinping is coaching her, so it's a good network. Let me put it this way. But so like, how can we benefit, right? Like in the next like 5 to 10 years, like given I think like restrictions will still be in game, right? Like unfortunately, like the whole COVID ploy is like over in a sense. But the problem is that I see like within countries, people like the jig is up, but in between countries, right? Like on international relations basis, like no one wants to go first and like say, yeah, just come, right? Like Mexico did. So how can we benefit? Like studying in a country like Russia or China should like get like a foothold there, right? Which I have already in China, but like in Russia, maybe like in Moscow or St. Petersburg, right? Yeah, for marriage, citizenship as well as business, and citizenship specifically for Russia because like they changed the laws. I'm not sure if you're aware of that. Like they encourage now basically like dual citizenship. Before you had to like renounce your previous citizenship, now you don't have to do it anymore. Which I think goes to show like in like your like view, which I think is correct. That like they want to incentivize like all the like previous Soviet Union basically people to actually come back to like the mother Russia, right? In a sense.
Yeah. That's what they want to do. Well, my thinking, you're basically asking me how to take advantage of the situation. And well, my thinking is that you should, one of the sensible things is to at least try to travel in both China and Russia and get a sense for the places.
Which I have done for China, right? Yeah, for China, I've done that extensively.
Yeah, and so do it for Russia and go there and check it out. Somebody, Auroris, was asking, why are Russian girls so hot? I don't know, man. I don't know, but they are. They're fucking blazing hot, right? And Ukrainian women, Jesus Christ, you just walk around in any city in Ukraine, and you're gonna spot, you know, if you go on like a weekend afternoon outside in the park or something, you're gonna spot like 3 or 4 girls who could be supermodels. I'm talking for real, okay? They've got like the height, the look, the thinness, the electricity that you're like, that chick could be a supermodel, no problem.
You did warn the young guys though, right? Like in your video, like American women are garbage. Yeah, exactly. You said actually like go for Far East Asia, don't go like for Eastern Europe / Russia,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
now, insofar as the serious point of your question, of like, yeah, you just have to check it out for a while. Check out both countries and live there for a while and get a sense of them. To tell you the truth, part of the reason I want to go to Russia is I want to check it out and see what it's like for myself. You know, I want to spend some time in Moscow and some time in St. Petersburg and travel around in between, and not just between those 2 cities, of course, but all over the country. And yeah, and if all goes well, I'll be there in less than a week's time. And if all goes well, fingers crossed, I'll be giving next week's webinar from Russia. So that'll be very exciting. But, you know, my point is that, see, you, how am I going to put this? You just have to go. And the pandemic thing is making things difficult. But, you know, go. Now, you were asking also that you want to get married, or your girlfriend wants to get married?
My girlfriend's pushing. That's a problem. I don't really want to, but like the issue is, and this is a very tough one, right? This is where you get into like strategic marriage in a sense, which like, yeah, it used to be like the case like prior like World War II, but like I think it's more upcoming again, like even the West is like, because like all of these closed markets, be it like Russia or like actually China, right?
Yeah.
Like the only way you can really get in is like if you have a lot of capital,
Yeah.
or you actually marry to the market, right? Like those are really like the only two ways actually to like get into the markets. Like even though I've lived extensively in China, but like for example, like the only way actually like to really get there is a marriage visa, right?
Yeah.
Like marriage visa makes it way more simple.
Marcus, you're talking too much and not listening to what other people say. Work on that. Now, the question I have is, what are you ethnically? Are you German, Danish, English,
German.
French? What? You're German. Okay. So, and are you like that, like tall German looking?
Yeah, 190, blue eyes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you're like catnip for Chinese girls. Okay. Yeah. All kinds of Chinese girls were hitting on you probably. Am I wrong?
That's correct.
Okay. Then you have to figure out which is the best girl for you. Okay. This one that you got now, or someone in the future.
If I'll be 40, I'll take her, but I'm not. That's the issue.
Well, okay, but you know, sometimes there's a saying, you know, bird in hand beats 2 in the bush. Have you ever heard that expression?
I haven't.
Okay, it means, you know, a bird in hand that you caught already is better than 2 birds in the bush that you have to shoot and capture. Okay, because it could be that you miss. You see what I'm saying? And so you got to make the decision. I mean, like, how long have you been with this girl, and what does she bring to the table? And like, most important of all, is she a cheerleader or does she bring you down? Well, is she a cheerleader or does she bring you down?
She's a cheerleader. The only issue we have is like when we talk about politics, obviously, because like, well, 70 years of like CCP like has kind of brainwashed them. But yeah, except for that, like things have been working out.
How many kids does she want to have?
That's, I think, like a general issue in China these days, like because they had like one-child policy for so long, right? It's like many one. Like if they can afford two, but like personally, I want to have like 3, 4 at least.
Yeah,
but so like there's definitely like a difference. And
okay, then if I were you, this is what I would tell her. I'd tell her, look, I'll get married only if we have at least 5 children. If not, no. Just tell her. And tell her that, you know, you want to have a big family and you don't want her to do any fucking career. You want her to raise the kids right and have a lot of fucking babies. That's what I would tell her. Not kidding. Yeah.
Capital wise for me would work out, but like just like seeing a previous content and like also like seeing like with like the age difference, I think that's like the biggest like obstacle like in my mind.
What happens is that, see, the money thing insofar as kids are concerned, everybody always says, oh, we don't have the money, blah blah blah, but you figure out that thing, you solve it on the way, and you'd be surprised. Okay, a lot of opportunities pop up along the way. I actually recorded a video that's going to be on my free channel called Put Your Kids in Private School, where I discuss specifically this issue. That a lot of times when you have a lot of kids, the opportunities pop up from the weirdest places. But anyway, going back to this this issue with this girl, you know, if she's good enough and you've been happy with her for a while, how long have you been with her?
2 years.
2 years?
2 and a half.
2.5. Then marry her. Marry her, but, you know, tell her, lay down the law. Say, look, I'll marry you, but I want X number of kids, and I'm not going to marry you until you're knocked up. That's something I would suggest you do, by the way. Okay, knock her up first, then marriage. Okay, I mean, you know, she's 3-4 months pregnant for sure. You saw the sonogram or whatever the fuck it's called, right? Then wife her up. Yeah, and just get it done. Okay, and because if you're happy enough with her after 2.5 years, you're likely not going to find anybody who's going to make you substantially happy, or it's going to be marginally more so. And if you're telling me that she has all these connections and she is like plugged into Chinese society, well, you're married to her and you'll be able to go into China and live there and no problem, right? And you have a bunch of kids with her, you know, and you tell her outright, don't futz on this. Just tell her, look, I want 5 kids, 4 or 5 kids. If we don't have 4 or 5 kids, I'll find somebody else. And just hold her to that promise, okay? And like I said, don't marry her until she's knocked up, okay? Because it could be that she can't have babies. Or it could be that she'll say, yeah, sure, but let's get married first. No, pregnant first, then married. Okay.
Second, oh, sorry, you go.
Go ahead.
No, I was just like, I mean, like we spend like so much time on this one, right? Like because I actually like do want to quickly go into the second one. I think it's also important for like the other like audience, right? Like we covered like basically like Eastern Europe and like also actually you mentioned the Greens in like Germany, right? Even though they're like close to Russia, like in terms of like maybe like connections, ideology wise, they're completely opposed, right?
Yeah. So what?
So actually, yeah, how do you see that? Like also like with Eastern Europe, because like Eastern Europe is kind of like afraid of Russia, right? Because of, like the history. But like just ideology-wise, they're actually much closer to Russia than they are like to anything like in Western Europe or like the US.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Well, the Eastern Europeans look at the West in horror, and the whole social program of the women and the trans and the gays and all that shit, and they look at it with horror, justifiably so, as far as I'm concerned. Now, the Greens, the key issue is there. It doesn't matter the ideology; they are compromised. Okay, that's the key issue. I should have emphasized more in the presentation, so I'll emphasize it here. See, the Greens are going to win the next election by default, really, right? Well, the thing is, see, the Greens or the retired Green leadership and whatnot, because the Soviet Union fell apart 30 years ago, but the FSB and the Putin government, they have all that information on old Green Party members. And so they'll use that. It's compromat, as they call it, compromising information. And yeah, my personal thinking is that if the Greens come into power, they will turn their backs on America quicker than I don't know what, and run to the Russians. Okay.
Interesting.
They'll say that the Russians are, you know, they are the opposite of the horrible Americans, number one. And number two, they'll be afraid of what the Russians have on the old Green members, potentially the younger Green members. Okay. So yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one last anecdote maybe before you go like to the others. So I do have like my friends in Asia and stuff, and like in the Middle East as well. But like for Northern Europe, and that's specifically being like Finland, Sweden, which is like a failed state, right? Denmark, Netherlands, Germany, and France. I mean, France and Germany the same, right? I'm just saying like Sweden is like, I mean, like my Finnish friends, they say like Sweden is like kind of like the bad example for like where Finland doesn't want to go. So at least there's still some sense. But like all of these like nations, like they high tax, right? that they have like basically embraced like wokeism in a sense. And actually, I think like because of the pandemic, but even before that, like a lot of young people actually are leaving, like with like the whole digital nomad, right? They can work like from wherever. Basically, you have crypto, and basically like a lot of them are leaving into Spain, Portugal, Greece, and Italy, because even though like the countries are poor, right? Like the people are actually surprisingly rich in those places, and like the law is like more like a gray area in a sense, like in Asia compared to like a very fixed thing like it is in Northern Europe. So like maybe you can like on one hand like make a video on that, like on like in the future, like how like the young people actually do migration of like those digital workers. And second, just like an anecdote for you that like actually like I think a lot of young people like have finally like taken charge in a sense, right? Like before we all complained in a sense, but like actually now they start to act in a sense. They actually vote with their feet, which I think is just an interesting development. But
it's had a huge impact on real estate, the digital nomad shit. And I feel very fortunate because I was able to correctly anticipate what was going to happen, and so use it to my personal benefit. But no, insofar as how can I put it? This digital nomad lifestyle will only benefit the Russia-China axis, because
also I'm curious,
because more people will go there. Okay, especially Russia. Okay.
Russia, yes, I can see it, because actually they want to bring people, and like they also like they incentivize and make it easy. Actually, China makes it very difficult, right?
China makes it difficult, sure. But the Russians, they don't have that problem, you know. Sure. So yeah, I think that's, and also to see the Russians, they don't want any more Middle Easterners. Okay, they don't want any Muslims. And
yeah, actually, like, yeah, they took up like a lot of South African farmers, actually, like a lot of them, right? Like they all wanted to first to go to Australia, but Australia was like, no, fuck you, and like Russia was like, yeah, hell, I mean, like come to us, right?
It was stupid of it was stupid of any country to deny the white South African farmers, because those people are motivated and hardworking.
Yeah, every
skills, farmer is working hardworking, and they are motivated because they're scared.
Yeah, and then the skills, right? That's the most important, even like beyond motivation.
But, but well, no, I would disagree. I think that motivation is more important than skills. Because if you have a highly motivated people that are desperate to flee from some place, they will work their asses off. Look at all the immigrants who have gone to America fleeing from war or pestilence or famine or whatever the fuck. They work their asses off. Yeah, because they know how bad it is in the old country, and they don't want a repeat of that shit. Okay, and I think it was really despicable that the Dutch didn't open their borders to the Boers who are ethnically Dutch.
Yes, Dutch. Yes.
That was fucking evil, as far as I'm concerned. But you know, that's life. Anyway,
fair enough. Yeah, thanks for the time. And let's.
My pleasure, man. Take it easy, man. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Wouter, how's it going?
Hello. Hi, Coach. I had a question about. You were talking about Russian influence in Germany.
Yeah, where are you at? Are you in Germany?
No, I live in Netherlands.
Ah, where in the Netherlands? Well, I live there. You know that. I lived in Amsterdam.
Yeah, I live in Nijmegen.
I don't know where that is.
It's not very big.
Okay. Anyway, what's on your mind? Sorry.
Yeah, my question was about the. What do you think about Russian influence in the Scandinavian countries and
Russian influence in the Scandinavian countries?
Yeah.
Well, the Netherlands and Belgium are not Scandinavian. You mean like the?
No, but all of them. I mean.
Okay. Well, it's obvious that a lot of them are fucking gangsters that are hiding money there, oligarchs or whatnot. You know, certainly in London, for instance, you know, you have huge areas of SW1 in London that are basically the houses are really the bank accounts of Russian oligarchs. They just park their money there and just leave it there. The houses are empty, right? Yeah, I think that's all very despicable. And yeah, of course, I am against that, of course. I personally like Russians. Okay. I like them. There's something about them that I just like them. I don't have a problem with them. You know, I like their toughness. I like their directness. I like them. You know, it's simple as that. Do I like oligarchs and gangsters? Fuck no. Would I be involved in any kind of, you know, gangster shit? Fuck no. You know, I recently had the opportunity to get involved in something fairly shady here. And I was flattered that the person who approached me trusted me enough to offer me this shady thing, but I said no, because because I realized that, see, when you get involved in something shady, see, you're always exposed. You're never going to be worried. You're always going to be worried, rather. Years ago, I decided that I wanted to be rich, but I wanted to be rich enough that I did not worry about anything, but not so rich that I was worried all the time. You see, there's a difference.
Yeah.
See, a guy who's like a billionaire, he's always worried. Yeah. A guy who's got a few $1,000,000, scattered here and there, he's never worried because it's not enough. It's not enough for anybody to go after him, right? And any problem that he has, medical or, crashes the car or any shit like that, he can pay it off. It's no big deal. You see? So the point, you want to live a life that you don't worry. Okay?
Yeah, I got that covered.
There was a song by Fiona Apple where she sang, she wants to live the life that doesn't wake her in the night. That's a good fucking line. And that's very true. That's the thought that I have. I want to live a life that does not wake me in the night. I don't wake up because somebody's barging in my door, and I don't wake up because I'm afraid and I'm worried, and I wake up out of fear. You see what I'm saying? And I lost the point of what we were talking about. But you're talking about Russian oligarchs and shit like that.
Yeah, the
steer
influence.
clear of them, as far as I'm concerned. And as to their influence, look, it's inevitable. I mean, like, rich people throughout history have spread their money around. Back in the 70s, everybody was talking about the fucking Arab sheiks and shit like that who are buying up everything. And then in the 80s, it was the fucking Japanese who were buying up everything. And then it became the tech people, and it's the Russian oligarchs, and it'll be some other group in the future. It's always some group that's coming in and buying everything and throwing their money around, and then they'll be gone, and there'll be some other group. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, that's the way of the world. Anything else on your mind, man?
Yeah, well, that it was not my question. What I meant. No, I meant like the with the Nord Stream project.
Yeah.
That would make the Germans reliable on Russian gas.
Yeah.
For example, the Dutch are bringing gas and other stuff from Germany. Would that make them rely on Russians as well?
Sure.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, if the Germans are selling excess gas to the Dutch, sure, it would make them dependent, but they already are. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and you do keep in mind, you gotta keep something in mind. The Russians have no interest in fucking anybody over, okay? Because they see, a lot of times real power can be exercised by simply creating such a dependence that you never need to threaten. Okay, and the Russians are more subtle insofar as their use of power is concerned. The Americans are the ones who threaten and do stupid shit, sanctions and stuff like that only creates hatred towards them. Okay, and so yeah, that's what I think. See, because there was a famous saying by Al Capone that you get more from a kind word and gun than just from a kind word, which is very true. But you see, if you have the gun, you don't shoot the gun. If you shoot the gun, what happens is that people become less afraid of you because they realize, oh, he shot the gun. Oh, it wasn't that bad. You see? And that's what happened with this whole sanctions shit. People realized at first they were like, oh, this is terrible. And then they're like, oh, it's not that bad. And finally, oh, it's just a fucking annoyance. You see? That's what's going on. So anyway, thanks very much, Wouter, and glad to have you on, man. Thanks.
Yes. All right.
And let me take this as a final question from CHL88. Let me unmute him. CHL88, are you there?
Yes. Hello.
Hello. How's it going? Yeah, speak up, please. I can barely hear you.
Okay. Thank you. Hello.
What's on your mind?
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
I
hear you
was
fine. Go ahead.
okay. Yes, I was wondering, since you mentioned Taiwan, and now the
Yes.
U.S. and China is kind of, yeah, the West Pacific is kind of hit these few months. So I
Hmm.
wonder, uh, yeah, a war between, I mean, the U.S. would definitely use uh, Taiwan as a leverage against China. And yeah, that's also personal reasons that since I'm thinking
Yeah,
of,
yeah.
okay,
I'll tell you what I'm. Yeah, I'm tell you what I'm thinking about. I actually discussed it in the video that's going to appear on Wednesday, which is a video speculating as to a possible war between the U.S. and China, and of course, one of the reasons would potentially be Taiwan. My thinking is that I think that the Chinese are basically realizing that the smart move is not to get into a war over Taiwan. The smart move is to just play the long game, because I think that the Chinese recognize that America is falling apart, and so it's a burning dog, and there's that saying, "You never pet a burning dog." Yeah, yeah. You never get mixed up with a country that's going down the tubes, because they'll go to war as a way to distract from their internal problems. The United States has a whole host of internal problems that are very, very serious. And so my thinking is that the Chinese realize this, because they're not stupid, and they'll say to themselves, you know something, rather than risk a war with Taiwan, let's just play it safe, play it smart, play the long game. Because the Chinese eventually are going to roll up Taiwan. It's inevitable. Okay? Because it's not merely that China is bigger than Taiwan. It's not that they're going to have the military to do it. No, no, no. See, the Chinese want Taiwan. And when a country that big and that powerful wants something, it inevitably gets it. Okay? And so it's just for the Chinese, if they're smart, which they are, they should just be patient and realize that taking over Taiwan is going to be a while. It'll be maybe 15 years. And by that time, the Americans will be out of the picture. Once the Americans are definitively out of the picture, then they'll take it over. Okay. But they will take it over inevitably. Okay. I think also the Chinese have no intention of destroying Taiwan. They want to take it over in one piece and with as little damage as possible. And they have no interest apart from the political dissidents, they have no interest in hurting the Taiwanese people. At least that's what it appears so to me on the outside. They want to take it over as an issue of pride, and they probably imprison and or execute the Taiwanese leadership, certainly. But their goal is not to destroy Taiwan. It's to bring it under their umbrella. And I think it's just an itch that they cannot stop scratching. They'll never get over it. Okay. And I think that if they're smart and patient, they'll get it. They just have to wait a little bit. Yeah. Wait until America is out of the picture. Yeah. I assume you're Chinese, right?
yeah, more like Hong Kongers as yeah,
Yeah.
Taiwan is closer
How's the
place to
situation
me.
in Hong Kong?
Well, I remember last time in the webinar I said a storm is coming, but looks like
Yeah.
there's no storm. But this place is definitely not the same place, and people are keep talking about moving to other country, which yeah,
Yeah.
I'm one of them.
Yeah,
So
because
I'm
Taiwan is assimilating Hong Kong. It's taking it over.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
But see the way they're doing it. They're putting pressure. They're squeezing gently on it, slowly, little by little, not like grabbing it. It's a slow squeeze, and in that slow squeeze, the people who don't like it are escaping. You see what I mean? And
yeah,
yeah, if you're in Hong Kong and you don't like the Chinese, now's the time to leave, and so people are leaving. And the people who stay, they're going to be loyal to the CCP and China generally, and that's the future, you know. And Hong Kong is always going to be this rich city where the rich people want to live. That's what Hong Kong is going to become. It's going to become like in the U.S., like Malibu. You know what I mean? I mean,
um,
it's like a Malibu is almost like a resort, but like the city of the rich people, the rich people's playground. That's what Hong Kong is always going to be. You know, that's my thinking at this point. I could be wrong, but the way things are going and the way that the Chinese are patiently assimilating Hong Kong, you know, because yeah, you have little protests here and there, and maybe they get put down or whatnot, but it's a slow and incremental process, very patient. And that's something that I have to admire about the Chinese leadership, that when they have a particular purpose or a particular project, they're very patient. They know that getting their way might take a long time, but it's more important to get their way in a way that suits them than to be impatient. And that kind of patience is priceless. I wish more people in the West, especially the United States, were like that, but it's just a different mentality.
Yeah.
Anyway, CHL, I'm gonna have to kick you out because I'm a little bit fried. It's 9 o'clock here, so yeah, take it easy, CHL 88. Thank you so much, and I want to thank all of you, and I hope that you enjoyed this presentation. That you know, I think well, you get my thinking at this point. I assume. Let me just sit up. I'm slouching like a bum, but. Yeah, it was really interesting and fun to put this presentation together. And I really do hope that it helped you out. And I really want to emphasize this future, this Russia-China future. Don't let the mainstream bullshitters convince you that this alliance, this de facto alliance is not happening. And don't allow them to convince you that it's going to break up anytime soon. It's not. Because both sides, like I said, the best metaphor that I gave in this presentation was when I said that Russia is that nerdy kid who kept on pining after the European chick, and she kept rejecting him and toying with him and teasing with him and then betraying him, and never realizing that there was this even hotter Chinese chick who was after him. And he finally noticed the hot Chinese chick, and he's realizing, what the fuck was I doing with this dumb European girl? This hot Chinese girl wants to fuck me morning, noon, and night, and you know, give me a nice hot dinner every night, and just yeah, treat me good. You know, so that's what's going on. That's the best metaphor I can come up with, and I hope you see why. So yeah. So anyway. Thank you so much for watching this presentation, and I will catch you next week, hopefully from Russia. So take it easy.